The sun is barely over the horizon, and tension coils like a rattlesnake on the dusty plains. Just when you think you've seen it all, a daring rescue hidden oil deposits. Midnight raids our hero. Evelyn Cade faces the most explosive showdown yet. Guns are drawn, alliances shift, and the slightest misstep can change everything. If you crave high-stakes drama, now's the time to stay with us until the final word. You won't want to miss how this battle for Cade's Hollow ends, every shot fired, and every choice made matters more than ever. If you're loving these tales, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share even more pulse-pounding stories. Stick around for parts 4 and 5, and then brace yourself for a conclusion that answers every question in spectacular fashion. The late autumn sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in warm hues of copper and gold, as if clinging to the last vestiges of daylight over the endless plains of the Windrover territory. Against this luminous backdrop, a solitary saloon sign squeaked and swayed in the breeze, its chipped lettering reading, "The Rusted Stirrup." The establishment occupied a precarious place at the edge of a settlement called Sparrow's Crest, a humble town so small that most mapmakers ignored it entirely. Nonetheless, it persisted, a meager outpost that attracted cattle drivers, miners with big dreams, wandering prospectors, and the occasional fugitive looking to evade official scrutiny. In other words, Sparrow's Crest was the kind of place where reputations were earned quickly or lost forever, often with the crack of a gunshot. On this particular evening, the dusty street was quiet except for a few tumbleweeds scuttling by and the occasional whistle of a far-off ranch hand wrapping up the day's chores. The saloon's windows glowed with lamplight, promising rowdy conversation, whiskey strong enough to burn all the way down, and a temporary refuge from the growing chill in the air. Inside, the smell of cheap tobacco fought with the stale odor of spilled ale, a mixture that could overpower the uninitiated. But no one stepped inside the Rusted Stirrup that night without a reason, and those reasons often involved business that skirted or outright violated the law. Yet for all its rough edges, the saloon harbored a sense of routine. Games of poker played out in the corner, while a reluctant piano tinkled through broken chords, struggling to be heard over the rising and falling tenor of frontier disputes. The bartending duties belonged to a grizzled man named Connell Rowe, who had seen Sparrow's Crest grow from a cluster of tents into a loose arrangement of clapboard buildings. He had presided over the bar top since those early days, pouring brackish whiskey and watery beer for anyone who could pay occasionally, for those who could not, but had a hard-luck story he halfway believed. On this evening, however, the air felt different, charged as though the desert winds carried the promise of something dire on their currents. Whispers around the settlement had spoken of new arrivals, claiming territory that wasn't theirs. A rumor had circulated that Graham Latch, a notorious figure rumored to be in the pockets of powerful industrial interests, was in the area with his crew of dangerous men. Stories of Latch's exploits trailed him like ghosts. He was said to have robbed stagecoaches, rustled cattle, and left more than a few unmarked graves in his wake. Some insisted that behind Latch stood an even more powerful hand, though no one could name it for certain. Despite the tension the saloon carried on, a small group of card players sipped cheap whiskey and swapped tall tales. A lanky piano player tried in vain to coax something akin to a tune from the battered upright. Outside, the wind picked up, sending a chorus of low-pitched howls between the buildings. It was a momentary lull before the true storm, a hush that settled when the door to the Rusted Stirrup swung open on squeaking hinges, and Evelyn Cade stepped inside. She did not look like someone who belonged in a saloon on the fringes of civilization, especially not so soon after burying her husband. Yet there she stood, chin-lifted eyes scanning the place with measured vigilance. The hush that fell over the room wasn't immediate, but a gradual ripple that spread outward, pausing card games, halting laughter, and stilling the performers' faltering piano keys. Evelyn Cade, in her mid-30s, wore mourning black, trimmed with subtle charcoal embroidery, well tailored to her slender yet resilient frame. Her hair, dark brown, threaded with strands of auburn, was pinned up neatly beneath a practical hat, more suited for riding than fashion. Dust from the plains marred the edges of her attire, a testament to the miles she had ridden, but she still possessed a quiet dignity that demanded attention. Her eyes, a striking shade of deep hazel, swept around the room, with the efficiency of someone who had learned to expect threats in unlikely places. Just 48 hours prior, Evelyn had overseen the funeral of her husband, Bryce Cade, laying him to rest on the high ridge overlooking their expansive ranch. The territory they owned, Cade's Hollow, stretched across thousands of acres of prime grazing land and boasted natural water sources that had become invaluable during these years of drought. But it wasn't just the surface resources that made Cade's Hollow so coveted. In hushed conversations late at night, Bryce had hinted that the land held even more potential riches. He'd never revealed all of his secrets, always telling Evelyn, "We'll talk about it when the time is right." Yet that time had never come. A horse Bryce had ridden 100 times supposedly through him, leaving him broken at the base of a rocky creek. Evelyn had struggled to accept the official verdict of accidental death, and every passing day made her more certain something darker had transpired. As Evelyn stepped further into the rusted stirrup chairs, scraped against the floorboards, and eyes followed her progress, she sensed the men's guarded curiosity, a freshly widowed woman entering this den of outlaws, gamblers, and mercenaries. Did she come seeking vengeance, answers, or both? Connell Rowe tried to mask his surprise. He was a broad-shouldered barkeep whose mere presence could silence a rowdy table. But around Evelyn, his stern countenance softened by a notch. "What can I get you, Miss Cade?" he asked after clearing his throat. "Just a whiskey." Neat, her voice carried even though she spoke softly. Something about her tone, calm and steady, said she was not someone to be trifled with. Connell set a glass on the bar and poured. "So sorry to hear about Bryce," he added quietly, glancing over his shoulder to see if anyone was eavesdropping. "How are you holding up? I'll manage," Evelyn replied, taking the glass and offering a courteous nod. That was all the condolence she cared to hear tonight. Not far away, at a large round table near the center of the saloon, the men she had expected to see watched her with naked curiosity. Graham Latch and a handful of his associates. Latch, rumored to lead a gang with outsized influence for such a small territory, lounged with a theatrical ease. His dapper black suit, silver-tipped boots, and well-groomed mustache seemed at odds with the raw frontier setting, marking him as a man who held more than a passing fancy for appearances. Evelyn felt the intensity of his gaze even before she looked directly at him. She sipped her whiskey, allowing the burn to center her focus, and then met Graham Latch's eyes. He offered a slow, rakish smile, one that failed to disguise the calculating gleam beneath his men flanked him. Dexter Polk, a wiry fellow with a long scar across his temple, fiddling with his revolver on the tabletop, and three others with lesser reputations but an evident willingness to do Latch's bidding. The entire group exuded a casual menace, like a pack of wolves disguised as lazy house dogs. Evelyn hadn't planned on a spectacle. Indeed, her intention was simply to make an appearance that announced she was no frail widow to be cornered into an easy bargain. Yet as the saloon hush stretched, Latch saw fit to break it with a mock chivalrous gesture. He tapped two fingers to his hat brim in a semblance of a salute. "Well, if it isn't the new mistress of Cade's Hollow," he drawled. "Heard you were mourning Miss Cade, but I see you're out and about all the same. Guess that means you've got business on your mind." Her hazel gaze was unwavering. "Bryce's funeral was 2 days ago. Life doesn't stop just because I lost my husband, Mr. Latch, especially not life on a ranch as large as mine." A few uneasy chuckles rippled through the saloon. The unspoken question lingered. Why here? Why approach Latch and his crew in public, rather than sending a lawyer or a bank notice? Evelyn took another measured sip of whiskey before continuing. "I hear you've been in Sparrow's Crest for about a week," she said. "Long enough for folks to start wondering about your intentions." Latch's smile widened. "I'm a man of many interests. Miss Cade right now, those interests are expanding." The subtext in his statement was clear. Latch wanted her land, possibly for the water rights, possibly for something else. Evelyn knew that once men like Latch sank their teeth into a prime piece of property, they wouldn't let go easily. And if Latch's rumored backers, wealthy cattle financiers, or some bigger fish from the eastern cities were truly behind him, he'd have near limitless resources to apply pressure. Evelyn placed her glass on the bar with a deliberate click that echoed in the silence. Cade's Hollow isn't for sale, she said. My father used to say that anyone trying to buy you out right after a tragedy is either a fool or a killer. I'd prefer not to find out which one you are. The tension coiled, Dexter Polk shifted in his seat, and the other men seemed poised on the brink of violence. Latch still wore that insufferable grin, but his eyes had turned to cold shards of glass. Now, he replied, there's no need for hostility. We're all civilized here. Aren't we, gentlemen? His men muttered agreement, though none looked particularly pleased. Evelyn sensed the unspoken demands in the silence. In the old days, a widow could be pressured, sometimes forcibly, to sign away her property, but those who tried to force her hand would learn quickly that she was not an easy mark. Bryce had insisted she learn every facet of ranch life, from breeding cattle to shooting the sidearm currently holstered at her hip. Before the tension could escalate further, Connell Rowe forced a loud cough, wiping a glass with his rag, as if that mundane chore could somehow diffuse the confrontation. It did momentarily. Some of the saloon patrons resumed their interrupted card games, albeit casting wary glances at the interplay near the bar. The piano player, too anxious to continue, lifted his hands off the keys and quietly sidled away from the instrument. Evelyn turned back to the counter, summoning the bartender's attention. One more, Connell, she said, lifting her glass. It's been that kind of week. Connell poured another finger of whiskey, and she let the golden brown liquid settle before sipping again. She could feel Latch's gaze drilling into her back, but she refused to reward his stare by turning around immediately. Instead, she pretended to find something fascinating about the swirling amber in her glass. It was a game of will, and she intended to show she had more than enough to match him. When she finally turned, Latch spoke first, his tone, somewhere between a purr and a threat. I understand you've got a lot on your plate, Miss Cade, especially with your husband's unfortunate demise. But the truth is, Bryce had unresolved transactions, debts. Folks in Prosperity Bend might be willing to talk to you about that. The mention of debts piqued her interest. Bryce had never been reckless with finances. While he was known for taking bold steps in ranching methods, the books were always meticulously balanced. My husband wasn't one to renege on a deal, she said, careful to keep her voice neutral. If he owed money, it would have been settled. And if someone claims otherwise, then they're the one who's lying. Dexter Polk snorted. Suit yourself, Miss Cade. But rumor is you're about to inherit an overdue notice from the bank in Prosperity Bend. Unfortunate timing for sure. Maybe we can... He paused, letting the implication hang in the air, help for a price. Evelyn's grip on her glass tightened, so Latch's angle was to pretend Bryce had run up debts, using that as leverage to corner her into selling the ranch, or at least ceding partial ownership and rights to the resources. It was laughable, but only if the local bank and certain unscrupulous individuals weren't in on the scheme. She couldn't completely dismiss the possibility. If you're hinting that I need protection, Mr. Latch, she said slowly, let me clarify, Cade's Hollow isn't lacking in that regard. She let her voice carry a dangerous undercurrent, one that suggested she had more allies and more grit than anyone might guess. Latch's feigned civility began to slip. I suggest you watch your tone, he said, each syllable clipped. People have a way of meeting unfortunate ends in these parts, especially if they make the wrong enemies. A hush fell over the saloon again, heavier this time. Even the men who'd gone back to their card game stopped mid-deal. Evelyn felt the shift. Everyone was waiting for her response. She set down her whiskey, took a step forward, and spoke so quietly that it forced Latch and his men to lean closer to hear. If I wanted to be safe, Mr. Latch, I wouldn't have come here to begin with. They stood like that for a few seconds, tension radiating in invisible waves. Latch was clearly accustomed to intimidation working swiftly, yet Evelyn's unflinching posture and resolute stare told him that typical methods might fail this time. For a moment, no one moved or spoke, and the saloon's air felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Latch broke into a smile, though it resembled a wolf baring teeth. Well, Miss Cade, he said in a tone that feigned geniality, it seems we need to talk matters over in a calmer setting. Tomorrow at noon, I'll be waiting at this very spot. You're invited to come. Bring any documents you think will clarify your late husband's finances. We'll settle things amicably one way or another. Amicably, Evelyn echoed, letting a hint of sarcasm tinge the word. I'll be here, Mr. Latch, but don't expect me to bring a pen unless I'm signing a statement that proves you're full of lies. Polk and the others rose from their chairs, tension quivering in the space between them and Evelyn. Connell Rowe tense behind the bar, likely ready to duck if bullets started flying. But Latch waved a dismissive hand as though he found the situation beneath him. Gentlemen, let's step out and leave Miss Cade to her drink, he said. I'm sure we've all got things to prepare for tomorrow, I know I do. Evelyn didn't budge as the men shouldered their way past, offering her nothing more than sidelong sneers or muttered remarks about a foolhardy woman. She waited until they pushed through the swinging doors, then exhaled a slow, controlled breath that eased the knot of tension coiled within her. In the corner of her mind, she was tallying how many men Latch had at his disposal and what resources they might call upon by tomorrow, Connell. Rowe spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. That was risky. Evelyn Latch doesn't bluff. He's got a long track record of making people disappear. And rumor has it he's got some heavy financial backers in the East. She met his concerned gaze. Better to risk confrontation now than let him pick us apart later, she replied, draining the rest of her whiskey in one gulp. The liquor stung her throat, but the sensation grounded her. Bryce warned me something like this might happen if certain men ever caught wind of what's under Cade's Hollow. But he never said who or why, just told me to be prepared for trouble. Connell's eyes narrowed. So he knew then, that means. Evelyn nodded. He suspected we'd be targeted. The accident that killed him. I'm more convinced than ever that it was no accident at all. A weighted silence fell over them, punctuated by the rustling of cloth as Connell wiped down the bar out of habit. In the background, the piano player gingerly resumed picking out notes as if hoping normalcy might return, yet the air still quivered with the aftershocks of what had just transpired. Evelyn turned to the bartender. I appreciate the drink, Connell, but I've got work to do. If Latch wants me here tomorrow at noon, I need to prepare. Evelyn's exit from the rusted stirrup was a statement in itself, an unhurried, unafraid stride past curious onlookers and out onto the sparsely lit main street of Sparrow's Crest. She breathed in the cool evening air, catching the lingering scent of horses and dust, a far cry from the stale tobacco odor inside the saloon. Her mare, a sleek roan named Belladonna, was tethered to the hitching post outside. Evelyn patted the horse's neck reassuringly before mounting up, scanning the street for any sign of Latch's men. They were nowhere in sight, though she doubted they'd gone far. With a light kick of her heels, she guided Belladonna through the narrow streets and onto the trail that led back to Cade's Hollow. The ranch itself lay several miles away, nestled among rolling plains that dipped into a fertile valley. Bryce had often boasted that the land was a slice of paradise in an unforgiving country. At times, Evelyn had almost believed him. Even under moonlight, the route felt etched into her muscles, left at the old cottonwood stump across the shallow creek bed, up the gentle slope, then downhill through a narrow pass. Fences stretched on either side, marking where their grazing fields began and ended. A hush seemed to envelop her as she neared the ranch, but it was not the comfortable stillness she once cherished. Tonight it felt more like a vacuum, as if the land itself was holding its breath for the battle to come. Before long, the familiar silhouette of Cade's Hollow materialized in the moonlight. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure, fashioned from logs and stone, reflecting Bryce's belief in building for the long haul. A barn, a bunkhouse, and various sheds formed a protective crescent around the yard. Ordinarily, the place would show signs of life at this hour. Ranch hands finishing up their last tasks, the chatter of a late meal, maybe the lowing of a restless steer. But Evelyn had chosen to send most of the workers to the northern fields earlier in the day, suspecting trouble was brewing and wanting them out of harm's way. She dismounted near the barn, leading Belladonna inside. A figure stepped from the shadows, face lined with concern. Mrs. Cade, the man greeted her softly. We've been awaiting your return. She recognized Wesley Breyer, the ranch's foreman. He was in his early 60s, grizzled from decades of hard work, but still possessed a formidable presence. Wesley had been the first person Bryce hired nearly 15 years ago, and he was fiercely loyal. Evelyn trusted him like family Wesley. She said acknowledging him Any trouble while I was gone? He shook his head. No trouble here, but I heard Latch's men sniffing around near the southern well earlier. One of the hands spotted them from a distance, said they looked to be taking measurements. Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. They're trying to size up the land. They probably know about the water, but they're fishing for more details. Wesley's eyes narrowed. And how'd your talk in town go? Evelyn gave a dry snort. It went exactly as I expected. Latch wants a meeting at noon tomorrow in Sparrow's Crest. He believes he can pressure me into signing over the ranch. We'll need to plan accordingly. They walked together toward the main house, the crunch of gravel under their boots marking their progress. Before entering, Evelyn paused to gaze across the moonlit fields. She saw a few grazing cattle off in the distance, black silhouettes against the lighter plain. This land was her life now. More than that, it was the embodiment of the dreams she and Bryce had shared. Letting it fall into the hands of a man like Latch was unthinkable. Wesley keyed in on her unspoken thoughts. We'll fight them, ma'am. Don't matter if they've got guns or crooked bankers or half the territory's law in their pockets. This is Bryce's place, your place, and we'll protect it. Thank you, Wesley, she said softly. Let's gather whoever's here. Jonah, Carla, and the rest. I need them in the parlor within the hour. He nodded and strode off. Evelyn entered the main house, lighting a lantern in the spacious parlor. It smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and leather vestiges of Bryce's presence that she'd grown so accustomed to, she hardly noticed them anymore. Tonight, though, she felt every reminder acutely. She tried not to let the grief overpower her. She had responsibilities to face first, tears she could shed another time. Soon enough, a handful of loyal ranch hands assembled Jonah Whitepath, a quiet young man with mixed Apache heritage who was unmatched as a tracker. Carla Hatch, the ranch's best horse trainer, a pair of older cowboys who had worked the land since her father's generation. Together, they formed the skeleton crew left behind while the bulk of the labor force tended the far pastures. Evelyn wasted no time explaining the situation. Graham Latch is making a move on Cade's Hollow. He's claiming Bryce left debts. He's demanding I meet him tomorrow in Sparrow's Crest to sign over the ranch. She paused, letting the indignation settle over her small audience. Jonah clenched his jaw and Carla let out a quiet curse under her breath. The older cowboys scowled their weathered faces, showing lines of concern. We all know that's horse manure, Carla said. Bryce was a gambler, sure, but never the kind to risk Cade's Hollow. Evelyn appreciated Carla's directness. Agreed, she replied. This is likely a ruse, possibly linked to some bigger scheme. Bryce once told me we had more than good grazing land here. He hinted that geological tests showed something else of value. He never told me the details, but I'm guessing Latch may have found out. One of the cowboys, Harlan cleared his throat. If that's true, it means Latch's backers got deeper pockets than we can imagine. You sure we can stand up to that? A frown tugged at Evelyn's lips. Standing up doesn't come with a guarantee of winning Harlan, but we either stand now or we surrender everything. Bryce and I built. There's no middle ground. Jonah shifted his weight. I can keep watch through the night. If Latch or his men try something, we'll know. Good idea, Evelyn said. Check the perimeter, especially the ridges overlooking the main house. If they're scouting, they'll want a vantage point. She issued more instructions, trusting each person's strengths. Carla would handle the horses, ensuring they were rested and ready for a rapid departure if needed. The cowboys would secure the bunkhouse and equipment. Wesley, once he returned, would help coordinate firearms and ammunition caches. Evelyn ended the gathering with a command: rest while you can. Tomorrow we confront Latch on our terms or not at all. Long after the others retired to their bunks or stations, Evelyn found herself in what had once been Bryce's study, a modest room lined with books on ranching techniques, geology, and territorial law. She remembered evenings spent in here, Bryce reading aloud by lamplight, excited about the future they were carving out of wilderness. Now she searched the shelves and drawers looking for anything he might have left behind. Letters, maps, any clue to the hidden value beneath Cade's Hollow. She opened an old ledger drawer and discovered a small lockable chest. Her heart quickened. She'd never seen it before. It was stashed behind copies of survey reports from 2 years ago. The chest had no visible inscription, just a brass lock that looked newer than the worn wood around it. Trying various desk keys, she eventually found the one that fit. Inside lay a revolver, sleek polished, with a rose motif etched along the barrel. Next to it, a handful of special .45 rounds stored in a small leather pouch. Evelyn lifted the firearm gently, letting the lantern light dance along the engraving. Bryce had told her of a custom gunsmith he once commissioned, but she'd never seen the result. It felt balanced and precise in her hand, almost like it was meant for her grip. A folded piece of paper accompanied the weapon, and she read it with mounting emotion. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I feared rightly. Someone's come after what lies beneath our land. This revolver is special, made by a master gunsmith. It shoots truer than any other sidearm I've encountered. It's yours if ever you need a final measure of defense. Trust your instincts just as I've trusted you. Bryce. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to break down. If Bryce had taken such precautions, he must have known his life was at stake. Had he known, too, that he might not live to warn her personally? Laying the note aside, she tested the revolver's cylinder and weight, feeling an inexplicable surge of confidence. By the time she locked everything away and stepped out of the study, moonlight shone through the windows in pale bands. She noticed movement near the barn. Wesley was there, quietly speaking to Jonah. They both looked up, saw her, and nodded. Security rounds were underway. She felt a pang of gratitude. Yes, she was the widow of Bryce Cade, but she was also the mistress of Cade's Hollow, a position that came with both authority and responsibility. She headed upstairs, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. The bedroom she had shared with Bryce felt foreign now, almost too large. Clothing hung in the wardrobe, half of it never to be worn again. For a moment she hesitated by the bed, memory tugging at her heart. Then she slipped off her boots and sat down heavily. She was exhausted, but her mind hummed with possibilities and dangers. The custom revolver stayed within easy reach on the nightstand. Sleep finally claimed her in the small hours, haunted by dreams of galloping horses and shadowy figures searching for the secret Bryce had died protecting. Dawn arrived, staining the sky a delicate pink that gradually brightened into gold. Evelyn woke to the sound of distant cattle lowing, followed by a sharp rap at her bedroom door. When she opened it, Wesley stood there, hat in hand. "Mornin', Mrs. Cade," he said. "We got a visitor. A messenger from Prosperity Bend arrived just now, carrying a letter for you." Evelyn frowned. "A letter already?" Wesley handed her a sealed envelope. The wax bore the insignia of the Prosperity Bend Bank, a stylized PBB. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She broke the seal and read the contents, her scowl deepening with each line. "It's a demand notice," she said through gritted teeth. "Claims Bryce took out a substantial loan to buy new livestock and equipment, but never repaid it. They're threatening foreclosure on the ranch if I don't settle by next week," Wesley snorted in derision. "That's hogwash. We just sold a batch of prime cattle 4 months back. The ranch is flush. Bryce never talked about taking any extra loans." Evelyn balled the letter in her fist. "This is exactly the angle Latch wants: legal leverage to force a sale. The bank's either been bribed or is in cahoots with him. Possibly both." She refused to let anger consume her. Instead, she shoved the letter into her pocket. "I'll deal with this after our confrontation in Sparrow's Crest." "Any sign of Latch's men?" Wesley shook his head. "Not yet. We set up watchers. Jonah's out by the eastern ridge. If they come sniffing around, we'll know Evelyn, dressed in her sturdier riding attire, a deep indigo jacket, and matching trousers that allowed for ease of movement. She strapped on her usual sidearm, then decided to also bring Bryce's custom revolver. Carefully, she nestled it in a shoulder holster beneath her jacket. If today turned violent, she wanted every advantage. Downstairs, Carla had prepared a quick breakfast of eggs and beans, fueling Evelyn for what might be a long and arduous morning. Over coffee, they went over last-minute details. Some of the ranch hands would remain behind to guard Cade's Hollow. Armed and ready if Latch tried a pincer move, Wesley and Jonah would accompany Evelyn to Sparrow's Crest, remaining inconspicuous, but close enough to intervene if matters escalated. By mid-morning, they mounted up. Evelyn rode. Belladonna Wesley took a sturdy bay, and Jonah rode a nimble paint horse. Carla waved them off, worry etched in her features, but also a fierce determination that said she'd hold the ranch if it came to that. The journey to Sparrow's Crest felt tense. every hoofbeat echoing the unspoken question. What is Latch planning? The sun climbed higher, scorching the land below. By the time they passed the outskirts of town, heat shimmered in visible waves off the dusty streets. They tethered their horses at a neutral spot just short of the main street, close enough to reach quickly if needed, but far enough that no one could sabotage their mounts while they were inside. Stay alert, Evelyn cautioned her companions. Latch wants me in that saloon, but he might also have hired snipers on rooftops or men posted in alleys. Wesley nodded, scanning the sparse buildings. Sparrow's Crest is near empty today. Looks like folks decided to close up shop. Word spread, Jonah said quietly. They know trouble's coming. Sparrow's Crest indeed had the air of a deserted place. Doors were shuttered and signs reading, "Closed for inventory or gone to visit." Kin hung crookedly from building fronts. Perhaps the citizens had elected to evacuate ahead of the impending confrontation, or maybe Latch had paid them to clear out for a day. Either way, it left the main thoroughfare eerily silent. At the far end of that thoroughfare stood the rusted stirrup, its weather-beaten sign swaying slightly in a faint breeze. Outside, a cluster of horses indicated Latch's men were already gathered. Within, Evelyn inhaled deeply, recalling how just last night she'd walked out of that saloon determined not to be intimidated. This morning she was equally resolute. Jonah and Wesley rode in behind her at a leisurely pace. When they came within sight of the saloon's entrance, Evelyn dismounted, looped Belladonna's reins over the hitching post, and walked the final stretch on foot. She felt Wesley and Jonah's eyes on her back, but they remained several paces behind, flanking her, but not crowding her. They'd be able to watch for any quick-draw attempts from Latch's men. Two of Latch's goons lounged on the boardwalk outside, rifles resting across their knees. They straightened the moment they recognized Evelyn. One spat a wad of tobacco into the dust, a silent show of contempt. The other simply sneered. Evelyn offered neither greeting nor reaction, pushing through the saloon's swinging doors as though she owned the place. Inside, the scene contrasted sharply with the near-abandoned street. A dozen men occupied the saloon's tables, all heavily armed. A hush settled as they looked her way. At a central table, Graham Latch sat with relaxed arrogance, swirling a glass of top-shelf whiskey. Dexter Polk hovered at his right, fiddling with his own gun belt. The tension in the saloon was nearly suffocating. Right on time, Miss Cade Latch greeted, raising his glass in mock salute. Punctuality is a virtue I admire. Evelyn didn't bother removing her hat. She stared him down. I want to see whatever supposed debt paperwork you're claiming. Bryce left unpaid. He smiled thinly. Why, of course. With a flourish, he pulled out a creased document and slid it across the table. She picked it up but barely glanced at it. She knew it would be fabricated or at least manipulated. Now, if you'll sign this transfer of ownership, Latch began tapping another set of papers on the table. She chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Let me guess. If I transfer Cade's Hollow to you, you'll handle these debts and spare me the trouble. That's the arrangement. Yes, he said smoothly. A fair exchange considering your difficult position. Silence stretched. The men around them tensed as if on cue. Evelyn wondered if they'd rehearsed an exact moment to draw down on her if she showed any resistance. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Wesley standing near the door with arms crossed. Jonah was nowhere in sight, which likely meant he'd found a vantage point for covering them with a rifle if needed. Evelyn took a slow breath, letting her hand drift near the holster concealed beneath her jacket. There's something I need to tell you, Mr. Latch, she said, voice steady. Cade's Hollow isn't for sale today or any other day, and if you keep pressing, you'll regret it. Graham Latch's lips curled into something resembling a sneer. Is that so? You're either very brave, Miss Cade, or woefully naive. You may not realize the magnitude of the forces you're dealing with. It's not just me. I've got very powerful associates who take a keen interest in acquiring your land. And when I say keen, I mean they're willing to do whatever it takes. She said nothing, simply holding his gaze. His arrogance was as thick as the whiskey in his glass, but she saw the flicker of doubt beneath her refusal to sign was a variable he'd clearly hoped to avoid. Without turning around, he snapped his fingers, and Dexter Polk tossed a rolled parchment on the table. Latch unfurled it and pointed to a list of transactions. I could go through these one by one, but let's cut to the chase. You owe $6,000 to the Prosperity Ben Bank, another $1,000 in back taxes, and that doesn't even include the interest accrued since your husband's death. Evelyn reached for the parchment, scanning the columns of numbers. Something about them looked off. They were typed obviously official in appearance, but the amounts seemed far too large. She recognized the name of a bank officer at the bottom. Linnell, someone Bryce had conducted legitimate business with in the past. Yet the signature was shaky, as if hastily forged. You and your associates sure have been busy, she said, pushing the document back to him. Strange how these debts never surfaced while Bryce was alive. Dexter Polk's scar twitched. Maybe Bryce knew time was running short and was trying to skirt his obligations. Evelyn's heart pounded at that insult to her husband's honor, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. You're calling Bryce a cheat? That's rich coming from a group of men who blow into town, wave a piece of paper, and claim ownership of something they've never worked a day in their lives. A dangerous hush descended over the saloon. Latch set down his whiskey glass with a little too much force, causing the amber liquid to slosh. I'm not here to debate who's honest and who's not. I'm giving you a straightforward offer: sign over the ranch and your so-called debts vanish. Walk away with a small fortune enough to start anew somewhere else. Isn't that what widows do when they lose their livelihood? They move on. She felt her lips curl into a tight smile. I'm not most widows. Polk's hand hovered near his revolver. You're a fool if you think you can stand against all of us. We have men posted all around Sparrow's Crest. One whistle and they'll swarm you. Evelyn refused to look away. Then go ahead and whistle, she said. But know that my friends are also nearby friends who don't miss when they shoot. If you want to drown this place in blood, that's on you. But I suspect your powerful associates might frown upon that kind of reckless spectacle. She saw the struggle in Latch's expression. He was torn between exerting brute force and maintaining the facade of civilized negotiations. His men shot each other nervous glances. They might have planned for a threat, but maybe not this level of confident resistance. Wesley Breyer eased closer from the doorway, arms still crossed but eyes alert. Outside, the mid-morning sun cast hot beams through the saloon's front windows, illuminating the tension-laden stage. Evelyn wondered if Latch was about to fold his hand or double down. She waited each second, feeling like an eternity. Eventually, Latch leaned back in his chair, picking up his whiskey again. I admire your resolve, Mrs. Cade, he said, dropping the false pleasantries. Let's assume for a moment these debts are a load of bunk. Let's assume you don't sign over Cade's Hollow. What then? You can't hide behind your ranch hands forever. My employers have resources that span multiple territories, and they're very interested in the assets beneath your land. There it was, the first overt reference to more than just water or grazing fields. He'd mentioned assets. She thought of the geological surveys Bryce had left reports she had partially seen but never fully understood. They pointed to coal deposits, but there might be more oil perhaps. She recalled snatches of conversation where Bryce had excitedly mentioned new energy sources, but it had always sounded so far-fetched. The only assets you're getting, she said, are the ones you forcibly take. And last I checked, that's illegal in this territory. Latch smirked. Illegal, yes. But out here, law can be flexible, especially if men are well compensated to look the other way. Evelyn glanced around the saloon. She saw fear and greed flicker in the men's eyes. Some were ready to draw. Others wanted no part in a gunfight with no guaranteed payout. The entire dynamic teetered on a razor's edge. Connell Rowe, tending the bar with visibly shaking hands, attempted an interruption. Maybe we should all take a moment. Shut your mouth, Dexter, Polk snapped, never breaking eye contact with Evelyn. The barkeep retreated behind an upended crate, as though bracing for the worst. Without warning, Latch raised his hand in a sharp motion. Dexter Polk drew his revolver. An instant later, Wesley lunged, trying to push Evelyn to safety, but Evelyn moved faster than either man, anticipated, stepping sideways and unbuttoning her jacket in one fluid motion. There was a split second where she locked eyes with Polk. She could see the tension in his arm, the intent in his narrowed gaze. Training guided her: a slight bend in the knees, a shift of weight, her right hand slipping beneath the jacket to grip the custom revolver. She squeezed the trigger just as Polk fired. Two deafening shots erupted almost simultaneously. Polk's bullet whizzed past her ear, burrowing into a wooden pillar behind her. Evelyn's shot struck the pistol barrel in Polk's hand, shattering the metal and forcing him to drop the now useless weapon with a cry of pain. A hush fell broken only by Polk's string of curses as he clutched his injured hand. The other men froze, momentarily stunned by the precision of her shot. Evelyn exhaled smoke curling from the muzzle of the custom revolver. "I'm only going to warn you once," she said, voice icily. "Calm, the next shot I fire won't be aimed at your gun. It'll be aimed at you." For a long, tremulous moment, no one moved. The saloon's suffocating hush pressed down on them all. Evelyn's heart thumped so loudly she could hear the blood rushing in her ears, but her hands remained steady, the custom revolver poised for another shot if anyone made a threatening move. That single demonstration of her skill, her willingness to go for a disarming strike instead of a lethal one, had left Latch's men visibly rattled. Even Graham Latch's face betrayed a flicker of real fear. Finally, Latch cleared his throat, his voice emerging strained. "Impressive," he managed. "Seems Bryce's wife isn't just a ranch hand after all." He inhaled and released a controlled breath, trying to regain composure. "Dexter, check your hand. Dexter." Polk sputtered an oath, glaring at Evelyn, but cradling his wrist. "You'll pay for that," he muttered, though he refrained from making another move. "Enough," Latch barked. He turned back to Evelyn, eyes narrowed. "You've made your point. You can shoot. But if you think that changes the final outcome, you're sorely mistaken. There are bigger powers at play here than a handful of fancy gun tricks." Evelyn could taste the acrid tang of gunpowder in the air. She kept her revolver aimed, refusing to back down, even as she recognized the precariousness of her situation. One woman plus Wesley somewhere in the crowd facing down a dozen outlaws. True Jonah was likely stationed nearby, rifle at the ready. She also knew her ranch hands had quietly taken up positions on rooftops and behind corner buildings prepared for a standoff. But if shooting broke out in earnest inside the saloon, it would be mayhem. "There's still time for us to avoid spilling more blood," she said, scanning the men's expressions. "If you've got business with me about alleged debts, I'll settle them in a lawful manner through the courts with a judge present. If your associates are as powerful as you claim, they can stand before a judge and present their case." Latch actually chuckled, but there was little humor in the sound. "You talk like the law matters out here," he sneered. "Do you think a piece of paper will stop what's coming once they find out you refuse to cooperate?" Despite herself, Evelyn felt a chill. She was certain now that something larger loomed. Perhaps investors, railroad barons, or some shadowy cartel of land speculators. For them, Cades Hollow was merely a stepping stone to profit. For her, it was everything she had left of Bryce. "I suggest you let your so-called associates know I'm not selling," she said. "And if they want to test my resolve, let them come. My bullets land exactly where I want them." In the oppressive stillness, Latch's men shifted nervously. Some exchanged worried looks. Others stared at Polk's ruined gun on the floor. Evelyn wasn't bluffing. Her shot had proved that. The only questions left were how far each side was willing to push this conflict and who might blink first. After what felt like an eternity, Graham Latch stood from his chair. He swept the scattered papers off the table, stuffing them into his coat pocket. "Fine," he said in a low growl. "We'll leave today. But don't mistake this for retreat, Mrs. Cade. We'll be back with more men, more resources, and fewer qualms about subtlety. You had your warning shot. Next time we won't be so generous." He gestured for his men to follow, glaring at Dexter Polk, until the injured man pried himself off the floor. They moved toward the saloon doors, stepping around Evelyn and Wesley in a wide arc, ensuring they stayed out of her line of fire. Evelyn watched them go, each footstep thudding like a promise of future violence. Only when the saloon doors flapped shut in their wake did she allow herself a slow, shuddering exhale. Evelyn stepped into the midday glare outside the rusted stirrup. Her pulse still throbbed from the intensity of that final precise shot. The weight of Bryce's custom revolver remained a solid reassurance beneath her jacket, But victory, if that's what it was, sat uneasily in her chest. She found Wesley Breyer on the boardwalk scanning the street for any sign of Latch's gang. A few townsfolk, emboldened, now that the immediate threat seemed to have passed, peered from cracked shutters or around building corners. Clearly, people were curious whether the widow's defiance would spark more bloodshed, or if it had already down the road. Jonah Whitepath appeared from an alley, rifle still in hand. He gave a brief nod in Evelyn's direction to let her know he was there if needed. She returned the gesture, grateful for his quiet vigilance. Where moments earlier, tension had loomed over everything, the main street now felt eerily still, the calm after a lightning strike. Evelyn could still smell the sulfurous residue of gunpowder on her clothes, and her ears rang faintly from the dissonant echo of close-range gunshots. Any illusions of a peaceful resolution had scattered like the broken shards of Dexter Polk's ruined pistol. There was no longer any doubt about the nature of the conflict. Graham Latch was determined to seize Cades Hollow, and that single shot hadn't changed his mind, merely delayed his timeline. Wesley approached, shaking his head in grudging admiration. "Ma'am, I've seen some fancy sharpshooters in my day, but that was downright unreal." He kept his voice low, well aware that prying ears might be nearby. "Not sure I had much choice," Evelyn replied, voice subdued. The adrenaline now subsided, leaving in its wake an exhausted tension in her limbs. She glanced at Jonah, who'd come closer. "Let's get out of here. We've made our point, and Latch won't be back in the open for a while." They moved toward their horses in single file, watchful of rooftops and alleyways. It felt like stepping out of a dream that could at any moment twist into a nightmare. When they reached the hitching post, Jonah untied the reins. Belladonna stamped and shook her head, as if sensing the tension in her rider. Evelyn stroked the mare's neck, murmuring a soothing word. "You hurt?" Jonah asked quietly, glancing over her. He knew how easily a person could miss a graze or a shallow wound during such a short, sharp conflict. "No," she replied, checking her arms and torso. Just rattled and a bit heartsick, she thought. If Bryce were alive, would he have handled this differently? Maybe, but she was the one who had to handle it now. Without further delay, they mounted and urged their horses away from the saloon. The dust of Sparrow's crest trailed behind them like an afterthought, the sun blistering overhead. Evelyn found her thoughts drifting to the secret chest in Bryce's study, wondering if her late husband had foreseen exactly this kind of confrontation, trusting that she'd have the resolve to answer it bullet for bullet. They rode in relative silence for several miles, a vigilance permeating the trio that made idle talk impossible. Wesley scanned their back trail frequently, while Jonah kept an eye on the horizon. Evelyn struggled with the surge of doubts in her mind, recalling Latch's parting words about larger powers that wouldn't shy away from brute force. Her husband's death, her near-run gunfight in the saloon, and the false bank notices all seemed like small cogs in a far larger machine. Eventually they crested a low ridge from which Cades Hollow became visible, a broad swath of grazing land interlaced with veins of greenery, where modest water sources still flowed. The main house and outbuildings looked almost serene in the distance, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the last stretch of peace before the storm truly hit. In the yard, they found Carla Hatch and a few of the older ranch hands hastily reinforcing the barn doors. Several wooden planks were being nailed across the structure, with more piles of lumber nearby. The group paused when they saw Evelyn and the men ride in expressions telegraphing relief. Carla set her hammer down and jogged over. "You're back," she exhaled, scanning Evelyn's face for any sign of injury or defeat. "Heard the shots. Rumor travels fast. Someone came racing out here not an hour ago, saying you traded bullets with Latch and lived to tell?" Evelyn gave a tight nod. "Latch isn't done, though. I warned him off, but next time it won't end so cleanly." She dismounted, ignoring the tremor in her thighs caused by lingering adrenaline. "What's our status here?" "We got a scare about half an hour ago," Carla replied, glancing toward the distant perimeter. "A rider was spotted on the south ridge. Vanished before we could figure out who it was. We're just boarding up in case they come in force." Wesley dismounted as well, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Any sign of sabotage, poisoned water, slashed fences?" Carla shook her head. "Not yet, but the implication was clear. Those were standard tactics for a methodical takeover, and Latch seemed cunning enough to use them." Evelyn gazed across the ranch yard, mentally mapping it as if anticipating a siege. She imagined Latch's men creeping in under the cover of night, cutting the lines to the well pump, torching the barn. They could do all manner of damage. And even with armed ranch hands, Cade's Hollow remained a sprawling domain that couldn't be fully guarded by a skeleton crew. Pressing her lips into a grim line, she turned to Wesley, Carla, and Jonah. We have to assume the worst. Have someone keep watch on the western approach and another on the southern. If you see anything suspicious, raise the alarm. I'll be in the main house. There's something I need to check. Inside the house, Evelyn felt the weight of responsibility tugging at her every step. She moved directly to Bryce's study, the room still bearing signs of her late-night rummaging books left pulled from the shelves, desk drawers ajar. The chest containing the custom revolver had been returned to its hiding spot, but she now removed it again, seeking any additional clues. She opened the chest, carefully leafing through old ranch ledgers and faded letters. Some were from Bryce's early days notes about expanding cattle herds or bartering deals with other ranchers, but nothing jumped out as vital. She set them aside, eventually uncovering two items at the bottom of the chest, a small leather-bound journal and a rolled document sealed with a broken wax stamp. Her pulse stirred. The journal's first page contained Bryce's cursive scrawl, "Private Observations Geological Survey." She remembered him briefly mentioning a traveling geologist who'd visited several months back. Most folks thought the only worth of the land was in cattle and water. Could this be the asset Latch hinted at? Flipping through the pages, she found sketches of the property's western ridges, random notations of soil composition, and references to seepage that might indicate oil or natural gas. The final entry was half-finished, scrawled in a rush. "Sawmen near the line shack. They know? Must confirm with survey office in Ridgemont." Evelyn's stomach flipped. So Bryce had suspected strangers were snooping around the ranch even before his accident. The second item, the rolled document, proved to be an official registration form from the Territorial Land Office. The date was recent, less than 3 weeks before he died. It detailed a claim to subterranean mineral rights, specifying petroleum or other hydrocarbon resources across the entire acreage of Cade's Hollow. She recognized Bryce's signature at the bottom, as well as that of a government clerk. It all made sense now. The rumors of hidden wealth, the suspicious debt letters, Latch's brazen attempt to seize control. There was oil beneath Cade's Hollow, or at least a strong possibility of it. That was the treasure powerful backers sought, something that could dwarf the cattle business. "I knew you were onto something," she murmured under her breath, recalling the last real conversation she and Bryce had shared. He'd been excited, but also vaguely worried. Now she fully understood why. If oil magnates, big financiers, or railroad interests caught wind of a massive untapped deposit, they wouldn't hesitate to crush one widow for the sake of profit. Her heart pounded as she realized the gravity of her position. If she could confirm these findings legally, maybe she could force outside intervention or attract official support. Yet that would take time, and Latch might move far quicker with his guns and bribes. Setting the journal aside, she rose to her feet. There was another place Bryce had sometimes visited in secret, an old line shack on the far western boundary. If he'd hidden anything else, maps or more proof, the shack was a likely site. By late afternoon, the ranch had settled into an uneasy vigil. Patrols rode along the perimeters while gates and doors were reinforced. Some hands busied themselves caring for livestock, pretending that normalcy persisted. Others hovered nervously near the bunkhouse, sharing quiet rumors about Latch's possible return. Evelyn sensed the ranch's collective anxiety coiling like a wound spring, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. She decided to slip away quietly, accompanied only by Jonah Whitepath. Wesley protested, worried the excursion to the far boundary was too risky, but Evelyn insisted, if Bryce left anything important out there, she argued, we need it before Latch's men find it. Jonah readied 2 horses, a pair of agile Mustangs known for sure-footedness on rocky terrain. Evelyn had traded Belladonna for one of these, wanting a smaller, more maneuverable mount in case they needed stealth. Armed with rifles and sidearms, they ventured toward the western boundary, guided by Bryce's half-finished notes in the journal. The trek required careful navigation. This corner of Cade's Hollow was rugged, dotted with sandstone outcroppings and brush-choked ravines. Few roads cut through. Bryce had always referred to the region as the land time forgot seldom used except by boundary riders checking fence lines. Evelyn had only visited the area once before years earlier, and she remembered being struck by its lonely beauty. Now that same isolation felt foreboding. Jonah rode slightly ahead, scanning for threats. The sun slanted low, casting elongated shadows across the land. Occasionally they paused to examine tracks, though nothing indicated a recent human presence. The hush of the wilderness pressed in, broken only by the soft clop of hooves and the distant cry of a hawk. After nearly an hour, they located the line shack, a low, weather-beaten structure nestled against a rocky bluff. It looked more or less abandoned, with shutters that hung crookedly and a collapsed lean-to on one side. Yet Evelyn spotted something odd: footprints around the door, fairly recent, and signs that the padlock had been tampered with. "Someone's been here," Jonah said quietly, gesturing with his rifle barrel. Tracks heading off north. Evelyn dismounted, heart pounding, with the certainty that Bryce's intuition had been correct. Someone else knew about the line shack. Perhaps they'd already found what Bryce left. She approached the door and tested the latch. As expected, the lock was broken. Inside, the single room stank of dust, rodent droppings, and stale air. A rough cot sat in one corner, half rotted. An old table with a broken leg lay overturned. It looked as if everything inside had been searched or ransacked. She lowered to her knees near the fireplace, feeling around the loose bricks. If Bryce had hidden something, it wouldn't be out in the open. Jonah kept watch at the doorway, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, while she methodically tested the bricks. Finally, one shifted. Evelyn pried it free, revealing a small recess behind. Her pulse fluttered, but the space was empty except for a few shards of crumbled mortar. Someone had beaten her to it. Evelyn's heart sank. So the evidence, whatever Bryce had hidden here, was gone. She rested back on her heels, frustration welling in her throat. "He must have stashed important documents or samples here," she said, blinking against the dust swirling in the dim interior. "Whoever's after Cade's Hollow got here first." Jonah knelt beside her, examining the empty recess. Could still be something hidden that they missed. He tapped on the floorboards, testing for hollow spaces. After a few tries, one board gave a dull, different sound. He looked up, raising an eyebrow. They managed to pry the board up with the butt of Jonah's rifle. Underneath, they found a small tin box, battered and rusted. Carefully, Evelyn lifted it out into the weak sunlight, filtering through the shutters. The box was locked, but the metal had corroded enough that she was able to force it open with a short pry from her knife. Inside lay two items. The first was a scrap of paper with handwritten notations, something resembling drill coordinates or geological reference points. The second was a folded letter sealed with a wax stamp that bore a stylized USGS in relief. Evelyn recognized the acronym United States Geological Survey. She exchanged a look with Jonah, who nodded for her to read. The letter proved to be an official arrangement between Bryce and a federal geologist named Lawrence Upton. Dated a month earlier, it referenced preliminary findings of petroleum beneath Cade's Hollow and outlined a plan for a formal survey. The text concluded with a chilling note in Bryce's own handwriting: "They've found out about our deposit. Upton insists we must formalize quickly. If something happens to me, this letter is our proof." Federal involvement, Jonah mused, scanning the words over her shoulder. Maybe that's why Latch is pulling every trick he can. He knows if this becomes official, the government might step in to protect it. Evelyn tucked the scrap of paper and the letter back into the tin. "We need to secure these. If Latch's backers learn we have official U.S. Geological Survey documents, they'll escalate." She glanced around the shack's interior one last time. The place had been thoroughly ransacked. Whoever came before likely believed they'd found everything. They'd missed the box in the floorboard, just barely. Stepping outside, she inhaled sharply, letting the crisp air clear her mind. The sun inched closer to the horizon, painting the sky in rich oranges and pinks. "We should head back," she said, mounting her horse. "No sense staying out here in the dark, especially if Latch's men are patrolling," Jonah agreed, and they turned their Mustangs eastward. As they rode, Evelyn clutched the tin box in her saddlebag. Bryce had died trying to shield Cade's Hollow from ruthless exploiters, industrial barons, or whoever stood behind Latch. Now she had at least part of the puzzle. The real question loomed, could she leverage it before Latch unleashed the next phase of his hostile takeover? They reached the ranch at dusk, greeted by flickering lanterns and the distant glow of the bunkhouse windows. Carla was the first to approach, as they dismounted, her expression tight with worry. "Any luck?" she asked. Evelyn nodded, extracting the rusted tin from her saddlebag. "They got most of what Bryce hid, but I found a partial ledger and a letter from a federal geologist. There's no question oil is under our land, and that's why Latch wants it." A low whistle escaped Carla's lips. "Oil? That's big folks back east are salivating for that resource, I hear. A well can turn a ranch into a fortune almost overnight." "Exactly," Evelyn said grimly. "And if you think about it, that also explains why Latch is forging documents about bank loans. If he can push me off the land, he and his silent partners claim the oil rights." They gathered in the ranch house's parlor. Wesley, Jonah, Carla, and Harlan, one of the older cowboys, listened as Evelyn read aloud the letter from the geologist. The formal language described promising geological indications, though an official survey had yet to be completed. At the end of the letter was a short paragraph referencing the legal steps Bryce had begun with the Territorial Land Office. After she finished, Wesley let out a long breath. "We can't just wave that at Latch and expect him to back off. If anything, it'll make him more desperate to remove us before the government sets eyes on this place." Evelyn agreed. She remembered how easily the bank had been manipulated. With enough bribes, a man like Latch could keep local authorities at bay while employing his outlaws to intimidate or, if necessary, eliminate any resistance. "We need outside help," Jonah said bluntly. "Somebody with real authority, a federal marshal or even a territorial judge, someone who can uphold the law if Latch tries his usual tricks." Evelyn nodded. "I'm thinking the same. There's a judge in Red Hawk Springs, Judge Hollings, who oversaw land disputes for my father once. He's known to be fair and not easily swayed by bribes." Wesley scratched his chin. "Red Hawk Springs is a day's ride. If you push hard, could be risky traveling with Latch's men lurking about." Carla stepped forward. "I'll go. I'm not a crack shot like you, Evelyn, but I know how to evade trouble on the trail. If something happens, I can handle myself." Evelyn considered it. Carla was indeed clever and swift. Her absence would be felt at the ranch, but the mission seemed crucial. "All right," she said, "take the letter and these documents to the judge. Explain our situation. Ask him for formal protection or an injunction that can't be ignored. In the meantime, we'll hold down Cade's Hollow Night spread across the ranch like a heavy blanket studded with stars that offered little comfort." As everyone prepared for the long hours ahead, Evelyn found it impossible to relax. She paced the veranda, her gaze drifting to the distant silhouette of rolling hills. Latch and his gang could be out there, preparing an ambush. Or maybe they were miles away, conferring with wealthy patrons who'd demand a swift and brutal resolution. Inside the ranch, hands secured windows and double-checked firearms. Harlan and another cowboy named Curtis volunteered for first watch, while Jonah readied himself for a second shift. Carla went to pack for her mission to Red Hawk Springs. Meanwhile, Wesley hovered near the stable, giving instructions to two of the ranch's best riders about how to manage the herd if an attack came in the night. Eventually, Evelyn retreated to her bedroom. The shadows here felt thicker than usual, the void on Bryce's side of the bed an inescapable reminder of her loss. She removed the custom revolver from her shoulder holster, setting it on the nightstand within easy reach. She planned to sleep, fully clothed if she managed any sleep at all. Sometime past midnight, faint movement outside stirred her from a light doze. She shot upright, heart pounding. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting a silver rectangle across the floor. Carefully, she rose and moved to the glass, peering out. In the front yard, she glimpsed two shadows, one tall, one shorter, skulking near the main fence line. Without hesitation, she grabbed her revolver and slipped downstairs. Moving with silent urgency, she caught Jonah in the hallway, rifle in hand. "Saw something?" he asked softly. She nodded, gesturing for him to follow. They crept out the back door, skirting around to surprise whoever might be encroaching on the ranch. From behind a stack of barrels, they had a clear view of the yard. Sure enough, two figures lingered by the fence, apparently trying to pry the boards loose or cut them. A muffled curse drifted on the breeze. The pair must have found the boards more secure than expected. Evelyn motioned for Jonah to circle around. and he vanished into the darkness with deft skill. She settled into a prone position on the ground, using a trough for partial cover. Her breathing was measured, the revolver's grip comforting in her hand. If the intruders tried to breach the fence, they might also attempt to sabotage the well or the barn. A snap of twigs alerted her that Jonah was in position. The intruders continued struggling with the fence. Oblivious, Evelyn took aim and fired a single shot into the ground about 2 yards from their feet. The muzzle flash lit the night briefly enough for her to see the startled expressions of 2 men she recognized. One wore the same dusty coat as those who'd been in Latch's entourage earlier that day. "Drop what you're doing," Evelyn yelled, staying low behind the trough. She didn't want to spook the intruders into firing blindly, but she also had no intention of letting them slip away. She heard a scuffle and a quick intake of breath. One man hissed, "Damn it, it's her." Then they bolted, running parallel to the fence in a desperate attempt to reach their horses. Evelyn was about to fire another warning shot when Jonah's rifle boomed. A bullet tore into the ground inches from the men's path, forcing them to skid to a halt. Neither intruder raised his weapon, but she saw the faint glint of steel at one man's hip. She advanced revolver, ready heart hammering in her chest. Jonah appeared from the opposite flank, pinning them between 2 lines of fire. All right," one man shouted, raising his hands. "We ain't armed for a fight." Evelyn gritted her teeth. "Sure you're not, just creeping around a widow's ranch in the dead of night with no ill intentions, right?" The second man, sweat beading on his forehead, spat onto the ground. "Latch sent us to see if you'd left the place unguarded." "That's all. Didn't expect you to be so jumpy." "Jumpy," Evelyn echoed, anger flaring. "You break into my property after threatening me in town, and you call me jumpy." She advanced another step, the custom revolver leveled at the man's chest. Jonah moved in closer, rifle raised. The first intruder flicked his gaze between them, his nervousness palpable. "Look, we were just following orders. We don't want a shootout. If Latch wants this land, it's his problem, not ours." "Fine," Evelyn said. "Then you can ride back and tell him he'll never have it. And if he tries a nighttime raid again, I won't be aiming for the ground." Jonah stepped forward, retrieving a small knife from the shorter man's belt and tossing it aside. "Start walking," he ordered. "Straight to your horses. Leave now and don't come back." The pair did as told, stumbling through the darkness to mount up. Evelyn watched them ride off into the moonlit plains, adrenaline surging through her limbs. She could almost taste her own fury. Latch's men had no qualms about creeping in, sabotaging property. Or far worse, Jonah exhaled, lowering his rifle. "That's not the last of them," he said, voice grim. "Tonight's just the start. They'll test our defenses any way they can." Evelyn nodded. "Then we'll be ready every time," she found herself praying. Carla reached the judge without incident. The ranch needed a legal shield as badly as it needed watchers on the fences. If Latch's nighttime probes continued, there was no telling how much bloodshed might ensue before a final reckoning arrived. Morning came without further intrusions, but the tension around Cade's Hollow only intensified. The ranch hands talked in hushed voices of the nighttime confrontation, quietly speculating how long they could hold out if Latch returned in greater numbers. Evelyn overheard one of them muttering about how the widows got aim like an avenging angel, but she doubted pure marksmanship would be enough when the real assault came. By noon, Carla Hatch was already hours into her journey. A young man named Toby had accompanied her, both riding fresh horses and carrying letters addressed to Judge Hollings. Evelyn had offered them a final reminder to avoid well-traveled roads and keep their eyes peeled for ambushes. Now she could only hope they'd make it safely to Red Hawk Springs and return with something that would keep Latch at bay. After a brief meal, Evelyn, Jonah, and Wesley gathered in the parlor to go over the geologist's letter and Bryce's scattered notes once more. The tin box from the line shack sat on the coffee table, a symbol of their precarious advantage. Wesley thumbed through the partial ledger detailing potential drilling sites. "Looks like Bryce believed at least one of these spots was a sure find. These coordinates," he trailed off, tapping the paper, "they match the ridgeline to the west, probably close to where you found that line shack." Jonah nodded. "If they start drilling up there and hit a well, it'd be a game changer for whichever side controls it." "No wonder Latch won't let up." Evelyn frowned, pacing in front of the fireplace. "We can't start drilling ourselves. That would alert Latch. We need an official claim recognized by the territory, or at least protected." But that takes time. Time was their enemy now. She imagined a telegraph line buzzing with messages between Latch and whichever big money players financed his operation. Every hour might bring fresh reinforcements or new underhanded tactics. Before they could conclude their discussion, a clamor rose from the yard. Wesley rushed to the window face, going taut. "Riders coming in from the north," he warned. At least 5 or 6. Jonah grabbed his rifle from where it rested against a chair. Evelyn checked her revolver, then the custom gun Bryce left her. Even if this turned out to be friendlies, she wasn't taking chances. They stepped onto the veranda, bracing for another showdown. A few ranch hands had already scrambled for cover behind barrels or fence posts. Dust kicked up in the distance as the riders approached. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, heart pounding. If it was Latch's men, they'd be unveiling a new trick. If it was someone else, it could be equally unpredictable. As they neared, she recognized one rider, Franklin Stone, an independent cattle drover who sometimes grazed his herds near Cade's Hollow. Alongside him were 4 others wearing trail-worn hats. No obvious hostility. Still, Evelyn didn't lower her gun until Franklin pulled up in the yard, raising an open palm. "Easy now," Franklin called. "We come in peace. Heard rumors that you might need a hand." Evelyn remembered Franklin as a straightforward, if somewhat gruff, rancher who minded his own business. He dismounted, followed by his men, and offered a curt nod. "Things sound ugly with Latch. My place isn't far off, and I don't like the idea of him swallowing up half the territory." Wesley blinked, clearly surprised. "So you're here to help," Franklin snorted. "Don't mistake this for charity. If Latch takes Cade's Hollow, what's to stop him from muscling out smaller ranchers like me? Next, figured we'd stand a better chance if we band together." Evelyn saw the logic. Latch's ambitions would hardly end with one ranch. In fact, once an oil operation got underway, unscrupulous backers might orchestrate a land grab spree across the region. Franklin's arrival signaled that some neighbors were unwilling to roll over. "We're grateful," she said, holstering her revolver. "But you know what you're getting into, right? Latch won't like it if he sees you siding with me. He could target your ranch next." "Already heard whispers of sabotage," Franklin replied grimly. 2 nights ago, a section of my fence was cut and 6 head of cattle wandered off. I suspect Latch's men. So yeah, I'm prepared for a fight if it comes to that." Evelyn gestured for him and his men to join them on the veranda. "Let's discuss how we coordinate defenses," she said. "We've got watchers posted around Cade's Hollow, but the property is massive. If you're offering men, we'll need to station them strategically." Franklin nodded, and they spent the next hour mapping out vantage points, discussing the best ways to communicate. If trouble erupted, Harlan found extra rifles and ammunition in the barn's makeshift armory. Franklin's men, hardened from years of driving cattle in lawless territories, expressed a grim willingness to stand their ground against Latch's outlaws. During a lull, Jonah pulled Evelyn aside. "This is good," he said softly, "but it might also provoke Latch. He'll see we're rallying people. He could escalate." "He was going to escalate regardless," Evelyn replied. "At least now we won't be caught off guard. If others realize Latch threatens them too, we might form a bigger alliance." Jonah exhaled. "I just worry about the cost." Bryce was the dreamer. "You were the practical one, and now you're carrying the fight alone." She set a hand on his arm. "I'm not alone," she corrected. "I have all of you, and that's what matters." They rejoined the larger group, finalizing positions for the night watch. By the time they finished, the afternoon sun angled across the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. Franklin and his riders chose to stay the night, offering extra security. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Maybe enough ranchers banding together could blunt Latch's assault until Carla returned with a legal warrant or injunction. But that hope remained fragile, like a lit match in a gusting wind. Night fell, ushering in another stretch of tense anticipation. The ranch now bristled with watchers, Franklin's men among them, rotating shifts with Evelyn's own hands. Lanterns were kept low to avoid making easy targets. Guns were loaded, stashed, and reloaded. Outside, the quiet expanse of plains offered no clue to lurking dangers. Evelyn, however, was determined not to cower inside the house. She joined Jonah on the northern perimeter, carrying Bryce's custom revolver in a holster strapped over her coat. They took turns scanning the horizon with a spyglass, but only the silver-lit shapes of grazing cattle broke the landscape. After an hour, Jonah sighed. Strange how empty it feels, yet we know they're out there somewhere. They'll come, Evelyn said with conviction. Not sure if it'll be tonight, but Latch won't hold back once his backers start breathing down his neck. Jonah gave a slight nod, returning the spyglass to her. Carla's going to need at least another day or two to reach Judge Hollings. Even if she finds him returning, could take longer. We might be on our own for a while. A part of Evelyn had already accepted that. She recalled the last time she'd felt such helplessness, standing beside Bryce's still body, in the creek eyes brimming with tears, uncertain how the world could keep turning. But now a different emotion fueled her defiance. She had Bryce's words in her head, guiding her, "Trust your instincts just as I trusted you." They continued the vigil until well after midnight. Only the gentle rustle of wind in the tall grass broke the stillness. Occasionally faint snatches of murmured conversation drifted from other watchers along the fence lines. Eventually Jonah persuaded her to get some rest. She was reluctant, but exhaustion weighed heavy. In the small hours before dawn, she retreated to the main house, stumbling through the quiet hallway into the parlor. Settling onto a couch rather than going upstairs, she cradled the custom revolver and closed her eyes. A swirl of half-formed dreams passed behind her eyelids. Images of Bryce smiling, then Latch's sneering face, then an open gusher of oil, transforming the ranch into a frenzy of men drilling. She woke once to the sound of her own ragged breathing, heart pounding. Silence still reigned outside. She could see the sky lightening to a pale gray morning was near. Despite the rough night, she forced herself up, heading to the kitchen. She found Wesley there nursing a mug of coffee. He offered her one without comment, clearly reading the strain on her features. "Any trouble?" she asked, taking a grateful sip. "Nothing," Wesley replied. "No sign of Latch's men, no shadowy figures near the fences. Makes me uneasy, like they're planning something bigger." Evelyn nodded, her gaze drawn to the first hints of sunrise through the window. The ranch might have survived another night, but each passing day without Carla's return ramped up the tension. She wondered if Latch was giving them just enough rope to hang themselves, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By mid-morning, a humid haze clung to the plains, promising an oppressive heat. Later, the ranch hands went about chores with a watchful air. Franklin Stone coordinated a few of his men to survey the wells and feed troughs, wary of tampering. Others gathered stray cattle and repaired minor damage to fences from the night before. Evelyn was thankful for the help, but each new day also brought a fresh wave of dread. She was in the barn checking on a pregnant mare alongside Carla's apprentice, Martha, when she heard frantic shouting from the direction of the house. Swiftly, she handed the mare's lead to Martha and hurried outside Jonah, and Wesley sprinted across the yard, meeting her halfway. "A rider east side," Jonah gasped. "Looks bad, like they've been shot." Alarm jolted through Evelyn. Without another word, she followed them toward the eastern fence, where she saw a lone horse limping into the yard. The rider, a young man, sagged in the saddle, clutching his side. Blood stained his shirt. Evelyn recognized him as Toby, who had departed with Carla for Red Hawk Springs. "Toby," she shouted, rushing forward. Jonah helped ease him from the saddle, laying him gently on the ground. The horse whinnied, clearly distressed. Evelyn pressed a hand to Toby's wound, feeling hot, sticky blood seep through her fingers. "What happened? Where's Carla?" Toby's eyes rolled, his face ashen. He managed to rasp out, "Ambush near the old canyon pass." "Carla," he coughed, struggling for breath. "They took her." Evelyn's heart constricted. "Who?" Latch's men, he swallowed painfully. "Didn't recognize some, but they mentioned someone named Latch. Carla fought back, told me to ride. Warn you." His voice trailed off into a gasp. She pressed harder on the wound, yelling for help. Franklin's men gathered in a cluster, and one of them dashed for the medical supplies. Wesley arrived with bandages and a canteen of water, while he and Jonah did what they could to stanch Toby's bleeding. Evelyn felt shock and fury roil within her. Carla had been captured. Toby's eyes fluttered, breath ragged. He tried to speak again, but only managed an anguished moan. Wesley barked at everyone to give space. "Let me handle him," he growled, ripping open Toby's shirt and applying pressure to the wound. The bullet had torn through the side, likely cracking a rib. They'd need skilled care if Toby was to survive. Evelyn rose, her hands still smeared with blood, stepping away so as not to interfere. Jonah's face was hard, his jaw clenched. Latch must have gotten wind of her trip to see the judge. He said, maybe they were waiting on the road. Franklin Stone cursed under his breath. Kid's lucky he made it back alive. Probably Carla created the distraction that let him escape. Evelyn's mind spun. Carla had the documents meant for Judge Hollings, including the letter from the geologist. If Latch's men seized them, then the entire plan for legal protection was compromised. Worse yet, Carla herself was in danger. Latch could use her as leverage or, worse, in some twisted show of force. She forced calm in her voice, though her body trembled with rage. We need to mount a rescue, or at least confirm where they're holding her. She turned to Jonah and Franklin. Latch wants me to come to him, no doubt, but we can't just charge blindly. We need a plan. The yard swirled with sudden activity, men and women alike preparing horses, checking firearms, and hastily discussing strategy. Wesley did what he could for Toby, who slipped into semi-consciousness. The bullet hadn't struck any vital organs. Wesley thought he'd live if the bleeding could be managed and infection prevented. Still, Toby's warning before lapsing into unconsciousness repeated in Evelyn's mind. They took Carla. She gathered a core group in the barn, Jonah, Franklin, Harlan, and two of Franklin's best trackers. She unrolled a crude map of the territory, spreading it on a feed crate. Toby said they hit him near the Old Canyon Pass. She began tracing a finger along the eastern section of the map. That's a narrow route to Red Hawk Springs. If they wanted to intercept someone traveling that way, it makes sense. Jonah nodded. The canyon's got plenty of hideouts, small offshoot trails, and caves. Could be anywhere in that tangle. Franklin's trackers exchanged glances. One named Riley said, "We know that pass. Once used it during a cattle drive. If Latch's men are holed up there, they could keep Carla hidden or move her quickly if they sense trouble." Evelyn felt the tremor of urgency. Every minute they wasted Carla's life hung in the balance. But charging in without recon could be suicidal, especially if Latch had a sizable force. She picked up Bryce's custom revolver, feeling its weight. "We need to approach quietly," she said. "At least find out where she's being held. Franklin, can you spare those trackers for stealth work?" Franklin nodded. "Riley and Jules are good at slipping past guard posts. They can scout. Then once we know the lay of the land, we'll decide how to strike." A grim hush fell. Everyone understood the risk. If Carla was used as bait to lure Evelyn into a trap, it meant Latch was upping the stakes. Possibly he wanted to swap Carla's life for the deed to Cade's Hollow or the geologist's letter. Or maybe he planned a public example of what happens to those who defy him. Evelyn's stomach churned at the possibilities. "Let's do it," she said, steeling herself. "Jonah and I will lead a small contingent, maybe 6 of us total. The rest need to stay here and defend the ranch. We can't leave Cade's Hollow unprotected." They formed 2 squads. Evelyn, Jonah, Franklin, and the 2 trackers would form the rescue team. Meanwhile, Wesley, Harlan, and the remaining hands would fortify the ranch. If Carla was alive and being held at the Canyon Pass, they had to get her back quickly, or any legal hope of halting Latch would be lost. While the trackers rushed to gather supplies, Evelyn stepped outside, pressing a hand to her brow. The day had turned stifling, a harsh sun overhead, but the heat hardly registered. She was more focused on the reality that her friend's life depended on her decisions. As she rejoined the others saddling up, she spared a glance at the wounded Toby, who lay under a shade canopy with Wesley tending him. If Carla was captured, she thought, what about the letters for Judge Hollings? Did Latch already read them? She swallowed hard, recalling the vow she had made at Bryce's grave to protect Cade's Hollow and everyone under her care, no matter the cost. She prayed she was strong enough to follow through, because now it seemed that cost might be measured in blood. The midday sun bore down on Cade's Hollow, turning every inch of ground into a shimmering haze of heat. Dust particles hung in the air, barely stirred by a faint wind. In the barn, Evelyn Cade double-checked her mare's saddle girth, sweat trickling down her temple. Anxiety gripped her like an iron band around her chest. Carla, her friend, her best horse trainer, was in the clutches of Latch's men, reportedly near the Old Canyon Pass. Every detail Toby provided before he blacked out replayed in her mind the ambush, Carla's shouts for Toby to flee the shots that left the young man bleeding. Outside Jonah Whitepath, Franklin Stone, and Franklin's two trackers, Riley and Jules finished readying their own mounts. Their expressions reflected the same grim determination Evelyn felt. They would ride lightly armed so as not to draw undue attention, but each carried at least one firearm as well as knives and extra cartridges. Since they didn't know precisely where Carla was being held, stealth would be as crucial as firepower. Meanwhile, the ranch had been left in the capable hands of Wesley Breyer Harlan and the remaining riders who would defend Cades Hollow. If Latch chose this moment to strike, Evelyn hated dividing their forces, but rescue demanded an immediate response. If they waited for more favorable conditions, more men, more intelligence, Carla's captors might relocate or decide to use her as a pawn in a final push to seize the ranch. Remember, Evelyn said, her voice low and urgent as she joined the men in the yard. We're not launching a frontal assault. We find out where they're keeping Carla, confirm her safety, and then figure out how to get her out without alerting the entire gang. Riley nodded, a wiry man with keen eyes that seemed to register every shift in the environment. The canyon's got plenty of side trails. Jules and I will go ahead, track down any signs of herding or campfires. We'll meet you at the mouth of the canyon at dusk. Franklin cast a wary look at the sky. Temperature's going to drop fast come nightfall. By then, Latch's men might be more alert if they suspect we're coming. Jonah tightened the strap on his rifle scabbard. All the more reason to approach quietly. If we manage to surprise them, we'll have the advantage. Evelyn swung into the saddle. The custom revolver Bryce had left her lay snug in its shoulder holster, concealed by a lightweight duster. She carried a standard revolver at her hip as well. The double arrangement felt cumbersome under normal circumstances, but she had no intention of being undergunned if a firefight erupted. They set off in a slow, measured trot, not wanting to kick up too much dust. A hush fell over the group. The ranch yard soon gave way to rolling hills. Behind them, Cades Hollow faded into the wavering distance. Evelyn's heart tightened. She wished she'd had a moment to speak with Toby again, to gather more details. But the young man was fighting a fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. Words slurred by pain and delirium. He'd risked his life to deliver that warning. It was up to them to ensure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. The land east of Cades Hollow gradually transformed, from sweeping grasslands to rocky outcroppings, as the group approached the canyon. Past cottonwoods and scrub brush grew in clumps, their sparse leaves rattling in the persistent breeze. Evelyn recognized the route from previous cattle drives. Usually the pass was an inconvenient shortcut, narrow with precarious ledges, but right now it served as an ideal trap for anyone traveling to Red Hawk Springs. They paused atop a ridge overlooking the approach to the canyon's entrance. Far below, a shimmering ribbon of a creek wound between steep walls of sandstone. Riley and Jules had gone ahead an hour earlier, hopefully to locate a vantage point from which to observe any camps or posted guards. Thus far, the ride had been uneventful. No suspicious signs, no well-placed sentries. Still, Evelyn's instincts remained on high alert. Latch's men wouldn't leave a captive like Carla unguarded. Jonah drew his horse alongside hers, pointing to a faint column of smoke rising in the distance. Might be from a camp, could be travelers, could be Latch's men. Franklin Stone frowned, adjusting the brim of his hat. We can't barge in if we aren't sure. Let's circle around from the north. The canyon has a natural bend. Maybe we can catch a glimpse of what's down there without showing ourselves. They descended the ridge carefully, hooves dislodging loose rocks that tumbled down the slope. The sun hung westward, casting elongated shadows that split the canyon floor into bright streaks and dark pools. Perfect places for an ambush. Every time the wind gusted, Evelyn smelled sage and dust, a reminder of how harsh and unforgiving this land could be. After nearly half an hour, they came upon a narrow trail that wound along the north rim, providing a partial overlook of the canyon. Dismounting, they led their horses on foot, crouching low to avoid silhouetting themselves against the sky. As they neared a jutting rock, Jonah motioned for silence. Creeping forward, Evelyn glimpsed a flattened area near the canyon floor, a natural clearing big enough for a small campsite. She counted 3 tents, tethered horses, and a smoldering fire. Men milled around, at least 4, possibly more out of sight. One was clearly armed with a rifle, pacing a short perimeter. Another seemed to be rummaging through something near the tents. She scanned for any sign of Carla. No immediate luck. Her heart thumped uncomfortably. If Carla wasn't in that campsite, the group might be deeper into the canyon's twists, or the smoke could be from an entirely different band of drifters. Franklin glanced around, lips pressed in a tight line. Jonah, peering through a spyglass, froze for a moment. I see a red bandana near that second tent. Carla often wears one when riding long distances. Evelyn's pulse skipped. That's got to be her gear. The presence of a personal item left in plain sight might be deliberate bait for the rescuers. But if that was indeed Carla's bandana, they were getting closer. Just then, movement from behind startled them. Evelyn whirled, revolver half drawn, but relaxed when she realized it was Riley and Jules appearing silently from the brush. Both men ducked, low expressions, tense. Riley gestured for them to retreat a few steps away from the cliff edge. We found a trail that loops around behind that camp, he whispered. There's a larger group deeper in the canyon, maybe a dozen more men. Looks like the main force is camped at a bigger clearing, behind a rock formation. Jewel nodded, adding in a hushed tone. We saw a woman bound near one of the tents, dark hair, clothes torn up. Could be Carla. Relief and dread warred within Evelyn. Carla was alive, but presumably in dire straits. Latch had mustered more than a few outlaws, and if a dozen men occupied the deeper clearing, waltzing in to free her would be suicide. She studied the surrounding cliffs, mind racing. Jonah exhaled slowly. We can't fight all of them, head on. Franklin's jaw tightened. We might not have to. If Carla's in that bigger camp, we can create a diversion at the smaller one. Draw away some of the guards. Evelyn recalled the group of 4 or 5 men in the campsite below. They're not far from the rest. If they get spooked, they'll call reinforcements. She weighed the options of stealthy extraction at night, a feigned cattle drive, or a direct confrontation. None guaranteed success. Latch's men presumably had the advantage of familiarity with the terrain by now, plus Carla as a bargaining chip. Riley glanced from face to face. Jules and I can slip down the back trail, cause a small ruckus, maybe set a fire, or do something that draws their attention. If enough men leave the main camp to investigate, you can grab Carla and run. Jonah frowned. That's risky. If you get caught, Riley's shrug was grim. I know, but if we do nothing, Carla's as good as dead. Evelyn swallowed. We have to try, but I don't want you two taking all the risk. Franklin can assist. Maybe set off a few shots to make the ruse convincing. They spent the next several minutes hashing out the details. Jules would slip down first circle east of the canyon and spark a brush fire near the smaller camp. The smoke and confusion would, with luck, prompt the main group to dispatch reinforcements. At the same time, Riley and Franklin would fire a few rounds from higher ground, making it seem like a skirmish was underway. That left Evelyn and Jonah to creep closer to the main camp locate Carla and free her amid the chaos. It wasn't a great plan, reliant on a heavy dose of luck and timing, but time was something Carla likely didn't have. Already the sun was sinking toward the canyon walls, turning the sky a vivid orange. If they waited until true darkness, the men might move her or do something irreversible. As dusk deepened, Jules departed with quiet determination, a canteen of lantern oil strapped to his belt and a small flint in hand. Riley and Franklin took positions on a rocky ledge to the west, rifles loaded, vantage set. Evelyn and Jonah waited on the northern rim until the signal, a flicker of flame, and the crack of distant gunfire. Then they would descend the precarious trail into the canyon's heart. Evelyn's nerves buzzed like live wires, and though she tried to control her breathing, each inhalation felt sharp. She recalled Carla's laughing face, how she'd teased Evelyn about her serious ranch mistress persona. Carla was one of the few who could coax a genuine smile from Evelyn, even in the worst of times. Now she was somewhere in that canyon, bound and possibly hurt, at the mercy of men who viewed her as nothing more than a bargaining chip. The thought stoked a fierce anger, fueling Evelyn's resolve. Jonah crouched beside her, behind a rock outcrop, reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" he asked, voice barely audible. She nodded, though it was more reflex than certainty. "Got no choice but to be," she murmured in reply. From far off, she heard the faint pop of a rifle shot, then another. A moment later, a glow tinted the canyon's eastern rim. The diversion had begun. Smoke curled upward, curling into the twilight sky. Franklin's rifle barked, echoing between the rocky walls. Evelyn forced herself to breathe steadily, waiting as she saw movement below men leaving the main camp, calling to each other in confusion. The fire flickered brighter, sending up a spiral of embers. Latch's men, uncertain whether they were under attack or dealing with an accident, reacted in haste. She spotted 4 riders racing out of the central clearing, heading east presumably to investigate the flames. Another small group of 3 dashed in the same direction on foot. Jonah tapped her arm. "This is our chance." They slung rifles over their backs and began a rapid descent down a narrow goat trail, half sliding, half running, trying not to send loose stones clattering. The flickering firelight provided just enough illumination to see, but also enough to risk them being spotted. Carefully, they stuck to shadows, hearts pounding, as the canyon walls towered overhead like silent sentinels. The main camp was near the canyon floor, sheltered by a ring of jagged rocks. As they approached, they heard urgent shouting, men barking orders, cursing whoever had started the fire. Torches danced in the camp's perimeter. Evelyn crouched behind a boulder, scanning for a glimpse of Carla. Her gaze swept across tents and tethered horses. Indeed, a rope-bound figure lay propped against a stump near the largest tent. Head bowed, Evelyn's breath caught. She recognized Carla's dark hair, though it looked matted with dirt and possibly blood. Carla's captors had left a single guard at her side, possibly more hidden among the rocks. Evelyn counted 3 or 4 men still in the vicinity, though the shadows made it hard to be sure. She spotted a tall figure pacing near the fire, revolver holstered. He looked anxious, checking the eastern horizon with each pass, perhaps itching to chase after the brush fire, but unwilling to leave the camp. In her peripheral vision, she noted Jonah scanning the area for vantage points. They needed a way to get Carla free without sparking a shootout in the open. One false move and they'd be pinned down, outnumbered. A shout from the canyon rim drew their attention. "Any of you see who set that fire? Hey, they got rifles up top." It was the voice of a man returning from the smaller campsite, clearly alarmed. A response rang out, a deeper voice, barking orders. Evelyn wished she could identify the speaker, Graham Latch maybe, but the echo off the sandstone walls distorted the sound. Sticking to the plan, she and Jonah slid closer, using the tents as partial cover. The guard by Carla's side seemed distracted by the commotion, craning his neck to see what was happening outside the camp. Through a gap in the rocks, Evelyn glimpsed flickers of muzzle flash, Franklin's team continuing their deception. Now or never, Evelyn pressed herself against the canvas of the nearest tent and signaled Jonah. They both emerged from cover in a burst of motion. Jonah leveled his rifle at the tall figure near the fire, while Evelyn rushed the guard beside Carla. The guard had just enough time to startle before she slammed the butt of her custom revolver against his wrist, knocking his weapon free. He cursed and staggered back. Carla's head jerked up, eyes wide with shock and then relief as she recognized Evelyn ropes bound her arms and legs. A gag muffled any words she tried to form. Evelyn dropped to her knees, fumbling with the knot around Carla's mouth. "I've got you," she hissed, hands trembling with urgency. A second later, Jonah fired a warning shot into the air, deterring the tall man from drawing his sidearm. "Don't even think about it," Jonah snarled. The man raised his hands, halfway uncertain whether to reach for his gun or call for help. Meanwhile, Carla spat out the gag, coughing, her voice ragged. "Watch behind you." Evelyn whirled just in time to see another outlaw rushing from the shadows, revolver aimed. She had no time to fire a precise shot, so she threw her shoulder against Carla, pushing them both to the ground. The outlaw's bullet tore through the air, where Evelyn's head had been an instant earlier. A second shot thundered, this time from Jonah's rifle, and the outlaw crumpled, weapon dropping. Chaos erupted as 2 other men charged in from the perimeter, guns in hand. Evelyn scrambled upright, the custom revolver gripped tight. She felt the buzz of adrenaline, her vision sharpening with each heartbeat. Evelyn squeezed the trigger at the closest attacker, aiming low. The bullet struck the man's thigh, sending him tumbling with a scream. Before she could adjust aim for the second, Jonah pivoted and fired again. The second attacker's weapon clattered from his hand as he cursed and stumbled. A hush fell, broken only by labored breathing and the crackle of distant flames. Carla let out a hoarse sob of relief. "Thank God," she mumbled, struggling with the ropes that bound her legs. Evelyn knelt, using her pocket knife to slice the bindings. Carla's wrists bore raw, angry marks where the rope had dug into her skin, and her lower lip was split. Still, she flashed Evelyn a shaky grin that suggested her spirit wasn't broken. The tall man by the fire, seeing that the tide had turned, slowly lowered his hands. Jonah swung his rifle toward him in warning, but the man stepped back trembling. I surrender, he stammered. Evelyn's mind whirled. She wanted to question him about Latch's whereabouts, but there was no time. The shrill calls of men echoed across the canyon. Voices raised in alarm. Their little skirmish had undoubtedly drawn attention. She could already see torches bobbing in the distance, an unmistakable sign that more outlaws were racing back toward the main camp. "We have to move," she said urgently. "Carla, can you walk?" Carla nodded through clenched teeth, though. When she tried to stand, she wobbled. "Don't worry," she rasped. "I'll manage." Jonah grabbed the tall man's revolver from his holster, tossing it aside. "You so much as blink at that gun, you're done," he warned. Then he turned to Evelyn. Which way Riley and Jules had planned a fallback route on the canyon's northern slope. If they could reach it, maybe they could slip away in the darkness. But that would require navigating a steep climb, and Carla didn't look fit for scaling cliffs. Evelyn's pulse hammered. They'd come all this way to rescue Carla. She refused to lose her to Latch again. "There's a side path near the creek," she recalled aloud. "It winds behind those boulders. If we hurry, we can get around the bend before the rest of them flood the camp." Already they heard pounding footsteps. The guard with the injured thigh lay on the ground, groaning. Another lay, sprawled unconscious, or worse. The tall man-arms, half raised, stared at them in fear. Evelyn exchanged a look with Jonah. There was no time to tie up prisoners or drag them along. They had to flee gently, supporting Carla. They lurched into motion, slipping past the scattered tents. The flicker of firelight cast frantic shadows, and Evelyn caught glimpses of men returning, silhouettes cresting the ridges shouting confusion. Jonah fired a warning shot overhead, dissuading anyone from rushing in. Then the three of them vanished into the darkness, guided by the faint glimmer of the creek. The narrow trail proved treacherous. Loose stones threatened to roll underfoot, and the drop on one side led directly into a tumble of boulders. Carla clung to Evelyn's shoulder, grimacing with each step. Nonetheless, they pressed on the distant shouts of Latch's men, echoing off canyon walls. A torchlit glow tinted the rocks in flickering oranges and reds. Jonah took point, pausing at intervals to scan for watchers. So far, the outlaws seemed concentrated around the main camp, uncertain which direction the rescuers had fled. Evelyn prayed that the confusion and the brush fire still commanded their attention. Occasionally, the acrid smell of smoke reached them, though the canyon breeze made it difficult to gauge the fire's progress. They had to find the horses. Earlier, they'd stashed them on the ridge, but Carla's condition made a steep climb risky. The more direct route involved following the creek until it turned toward a shallower slope. Every breath Evelyn took felt tight with worry. If they were spotted in this narrow corridor, it could become a deadly shooting gallery. At a bend in the trail, Jonah held up a hand to halt them. A figure emerged from behind a cluster of rocks. Evelyn's heart lurched until she recognized Riley's rifle in one hand, a smoking pistol in the other. Relief washed over her. Riley jerked his head. "Jules is still up top with Franklin. We got split when the outlaws poured back into the canyon. I think our diversion's done all it can." He paused, taking in Carla's bruised face and bloody lip. "Looks like you got her out, though." Carla swallowed, nodding a greeting. "Better than staying in that camp," she murmured. "I'm alive thanks to them." Cries reverberated again, closer this time. Evelyn stiffened. "We need to get out before they regroup. If Latch's men encircle the canyon, we'll be trapped." Riley bit his lip, glancing at Carla's unsteady stance. "We've got to go up that slope sooner or later." He pointed to a diagonal cut in the canyon's eastern wall, a place where the rock had fractured over time. The path looked steep, but not impossible. "Let's try it. Once we're on the ridge, we can circle around to the horses." With no better alternative, they started the climb. Evelyn and Riley supported Carla between them, while Jonah trailed behind, keeping watch. Each step dislodged pebbles that clattered downslope. The sounds were nerve-wracking, likely audible to any pursuers. They were a quarter of the way up when a sharp report rang out gunfire from below. A bullet slammed into the rocks, sending a spray of chips and debris. Carla yelped, nearly losing her footing. Jonah spun returning fire in the general direction of the muzzle flash. Evelyn's heart hammered as she urged Carla upward, half dragging her. "We're almost there," she gasped, glancing at the top. Yet it still seemed an impossibly distant goal. Adrenaline surged through every muscle. The group scrambled up the rocky path, pelted by occasional gunshots that ricocheted near their heels. Jonah attempted to lay down cover fire, but it was nearly blind shooting. He had only brief glimpses of the outlaws darting among the boulders below. Dust filled Evelyn's lungs, stinging her eyes, but she forced her legs to keep moving. Carla stumbled, cursing as the rough stones scraped her knee. Riley hauled her upright again, sweat pouring down his temples. A renewed volley of gunfire crackled, one bullet whizzing past so close, Evelyn felt the wind of it against her arm. She clenched her teeth, gripped Carla tighter, and willed her body to push onward. The slope steepened near the top, forcing them into a near crawl. Jonah aimed downward, firing a pair of quick shots that momentarily silenced their pursuers. When they finally reached the ridge, Evelyn collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. Carla slumped beside her, too breathless to speak. Riley signaled Jonah to check behind them, confirming the outlaws hadn't scaled the slope in pursuit. Jonah peered over the edge, rifle ready. "Seems like they're regrouping," he reported quietly. "Maybe they'll try a different approach." Evelyn dragged herself upright, offering a hand to Carla. "We can't wait. The horses are on the next rise. If we get to them, we might outrun whoever tries to circle around." Riley led the way, scanning the darkening horizon for signs of Jules or Franklin. Faint shouts echoed from the canyon, but the swirling wind made it hard to pinpoint direction. A sense of urgency propelled them onward, each step an exertion for Carla, who braced a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. After crossing a patch of scrub brush, they spotted the horses tied in a narrow ravine. The animals snorted jittery from the scent of smoke and the distant gunfire. Jonah rushed to calm them, patting necks and murmuring reassurance. Riley helped Evelyn lift Carla onto a stout bay mare. She winced but managed to settle into the saddle. "You need a doctor," Evelyn said, glancing at Carla's raw wrists. "That rope tore into you badly?" Carla drew a shuddering breath. "I'll survive. Let's just get away from here." A soft whistle cut through the gloom. Evelyn recognized Franklin Stone's signal. Moments later, Franklin emerged from behind a slab of sandstone, Jules in tow. Both men looked exhausted but relieved to see Carla safe. "Good to see you in one piece," Franklin said, eyeing Carla. "We'd about given up hope when half the canyon lit up with gunfire." Jules spat dust from his mouth. "We tried to keep them pinned, but that fire spread quicker than I expected. The wind turned, we had to pull back or risk being trapped by the flames." Evelyn's gaze flicked across the shadowy expanse. An orange glow illuminated the canyon's rim. Whether from brush fire or torches, she couldn't tell. "Let's go," she urged. "It's too dangerous to stay here." They rode northward under the cover of night, moving as quickly as Carla's condition allowed. The sky was moonless, and the darkness disoriented them. Occasionally, they paused to listen for pursuit, but aside from distant echoes of shouting and crackling fire, nothing indicated an immediate chase. It seemed Latch's men had enough on their hands trying to contain the chaos in the canyon. Once they felt reasonably sure they weren't being followed, the group made a wide loop around the ridges, aiming to rejoin the main road far from the ambush site. Carla, though in pain, managed to stay upright in the saddle. Her jaw set in grim endurance, Evelyn rode beside her, ready to catch her if she faltered. They reached a small arroyo shortly before midnight and decided to make camp under an overhang of rock. With only the dim glow of a single lantern, they tended Carla's wounds. Jonah used his canteen to wash the dried blood from her wrists, then applied a salve borrowed from Franklin's pack. Carla hissed through clenched teeth but murmured thanks. Franklin shook his head. "We have to assume Latch will come after us. He won't let this slight go unanswered, especially now that we've snatched his hostage right out from under his nose." Evelyn exhaled, agreed. And if Carla had those documents for the judge, Latch might already know about the letter from the geologist and the mineral rights claims. She fixed Carla with a worried look. "Did they take your saddlebags or the paperwork?" Carla's eyes flashed with frustration. "I didn't have a chance to destroy them. They rummaged through everything when they caught me. I don't know how much they understand, but they definitely saw official seals and references to the Territorial Land Office." A tense hush settled. If Latch's men realized the true significance of those documents, They might step up their game, possibly employing bigger guns or forging alliances with corrupt officials. The rescue had succeeded, but the broader war for Cades Hollow was far from over. Jonah tossed a few extra logs into a makeshift fire pit, kindling a small flame to ward off the chill. What's our next move? If we go back to the ranch, Latch might attack immediately. Evelyn folded her arms, staring into the flickering light. We have no choice. Toby's injured, and the ranch needs us. If Latch tries a full assault, we have to be there to stop him. Either that, or we gather allies, other ranchers like Franklin, who don't want to see this territory fall under Latch's iron grip. Franklin Stone nodded. I can reach out to some neighbors, sure, but folks are scared. Latch's real power is in those invisible backers. They might bring in professional gunslingers or private enforcers. You'll need a strong hand of your own, maybe a federal marshal. Evelyn recalled the letter from the survey office. If a federal agent were to confirm the oil find, the land could gain federal protection, but that would take time. She wasn't sure they had. They took turns keeping watch through the remainder of the night. Carla, finally able to rest, fell into a fitful sleep, her head pillowed on a rolled blanket. Evelyn sat next to her, gently brushing away stray locks of hair matted with grime. She couldn't help but remember how Carla had volunteered for that mission so bravely. Perhaps if Toby fully recovered, they could try again, this time with more caution. Morning arrived with a pale glimmer of light stealing over the horizon. They broke their makeshift camp quickly, sharing a minimal breakfast of dried jerky and tepid water. Carla managed to stand, though she leaned heavily on Jonah for support. The conversation turned to how best to re-enter Cades Hollow. We should approach from the west, Evelyn suggested. Latch will assume we'll come from the east or south, so let's circle around to the backside of the ranch. That way we avoid any watchers he might have posted on the main trails. Franklin nodded in agreement. It'll add miles, but it's safer. My men will ride with you as far as your ranch. After that, I'll try to drum up support from neighboring spreads. Carla swallowed. Once we're back, we can check on Toby. And she glanced at Evelyn. We need a plan in case Latch decides to storm the place. He's beyond just intimidation now. They rode out, taking it slow for Carla's sake. The sky blossomed from soft pink into a blazing gold as the sun gained strength, promising yet another scorcher of a day. Conversation was sparse, overshadowed by the question on everyone's minds. What was Latch planning next? By late morning, they saw the familiar outlines of Cades Hollow's western fence lines, rolling across sun-baked fields. From a distance, the ranch looked deceptively peaceful, cattle grazing, windmill blades spinning lazily. Yet Evelyn's tension spiked. If Latch had chosen this time to strike the yard, could be a battlefield. As they neared, Jonah let out a short whistle, signaling their approach. Two riders emerged from behind a small stand of cottonwoods, Wesley Breyer and Harlan. Both looked haggard but alert. Wesley's eyes lit with relief upon seeing Carla, though the lines in his forehead deepened with concern. Thank the Lord you made it back, he said. We've been worried sick. Evelyn dismounted, wincing at her stiff joints. Any trouble, she asked, scanning the property. Harlan spit dust from his mouth. Not yet, but we had scouts spot Latch's men prowling near the southern creek at dawn. Figured they might be sizing up a direct attack. Evelyn nodded gravely. It was just as she feared. Latch wouldn't let their rescue go unanswered. The ranch now sat like a fortress, waiting for siege. She extended a hand to Carla, helping her dismount. Let's get you seen by the dock. After that, we gather everyone for a war council. Within an hour, Carla was settled into a cot in the ranch house's extra room. Her wounds cleaned and dressed by a traveling medic who happened to be passing near the ranch. Toby, still recovering from the gunshot, lay in a bunk across the hall. The entire house vibrated with anxious energy. Franklin and his men readied to depart, intent on calling in more allies from the outlying ranches. Meanwhile, Jonah, Wesley, Harlan, and the rest of the Cades Hollow defenders gathered in the parlor. Evelyn stood at the head of the room, the dusty letter from the United States Geological Survey in her hands. We can't rely on local authorities, she began. Latch's pockets run deep, and we can't guarantee a fair hearing in Prosperity Bend. Judge Hollings in Red Hawk Springs was our best hope, but that route is compromised. She paused, glancing at Carla's closed door. Wesley frowned. Even if we tried again, Latch would just intercept whoever we send. Jonah rested a hand on his rifle. So we hold the ranch. If Latch wants a fight, let him come to us. We'll be on our own land with cover and a plan. That's better than trying to meet him out in the open. Evelyn appreciated Jonah's confidence, but she also recalled the possibility that Latch's powerful backers could send mercenaries or bribe any local posse. I agree we should fortify, she said, but this can't be a drawn-out siege. Eventually we'll run low on supplies or he'll find a way to sabotage our water. We need to force a confrontation on our terms and then deliver the proof of Latch's crimes to the right officials. Harlan cleared his throat. That means capturing Latch or at least some of his key men alive, right? Folks with enough knowledge of these forgeries and kidnappings to testify. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. The prospect of capturing Latch alive promised more complications than simply ending him with a bullet, but legally it was the surer path. Evelyn found her gaze drifting to the custom revolver on her belt. Part of her wanted justice for Bryce so badly that she could imagine pulling that trigger without hesitation. But if they killed Latch in a shootout, they might bury the truth of his financial connections with him. She nodded firmly, looking each man in the eye. Exactly. We lure him into attacking, defend ourselves, and if possible, take him and his top associates prisoner. Then we show these documents along with our testimonies to an official they can't bribe. Outside, Franklin's voice rang out. He was calling farewells, preparing to ride. Evelyn stepped onto the porch to see him off. He clasped her hand. I'll be back as soon as I can. Stay alive. We'll bring every decent rancher we can gather. Latch won't hold this territory hostage forever. Evelyn forced a smile. Thank you, Franklin, and be careful. Latch might have men watching the roads. He gave a short nod. They'll find I'm not so easily cornered. Then he spurred his horse, leading his men into the dusty afternoon. The afternoon wore on with an almost oppressive sense of waiting. Patrols circled Cade's hollow eyes, scanning the horizon for any sign of an approaching force. Twice riders reported glimpses of suspicious figures lurking near fence lines or watching from distant ridges, but no large-scale assault materialized. The unrelenting sun hammered down, turning the ranch into a parched oven. Inside, Evelyn paused by Carla's room. The woman dozed fitfully, face drawn from pain. A wave of anger swelled in Evelyn at the sight of her friend's injuries. Anger directed at Latch, his unknown sponsors, and anyone who aided them. She recalled Bryce's quiet resolve, the way he taught her to shoot with precision. Trust your instincts, he'd written. Just as I trusted you. She silently renewed her vow to defend the ranch in his name. In the late afternoon, a commotion rippled through the yard. Evelyn and Jonah rushed outside, weapons half drawn, expecting an attack. Instead, they found a single rider approaching under a makeshift white flag. The man pulled his horse to a stop 100 yards from the veranda, one hand raised to show he carried no visible gun. Wesley and Harlan took positions behind crates covering the approach. Evelyn stepped forward, carefully holding her custom revolver at her side. State your business. She called the rider, a lanky fellow, with sunken cheeks, responded with surprising calm. Message from Graham Latch. He requests a meeting sundown at the old windmill by the southern well. Says he wants to discuss terms for your surrender. A scornful laugh escaped Jonah. Surrender doesn't sound like Latch has learned anything from the last time we met. Evelyn maintained composure. What if we refuse, she asked, voice carrying across the yard. The messenger shrugged. Then he'll attack at dawn. His men are massing. He's offering you a chance to avoid bloodshed, sign over the ranch, leave quietly, could even keep a portion of the livestock for traveling funds. But that's the deal. A wave of indignation swept the ranch hands. Harlan spat in the dirt. We got your message, he growled. Now get off our land. The messenger's gaze flicked nervously to Evelyn. Your call, ma'am. Sundown at the windmill if you want to talk. Otherwise, come dawn, Latch will knock your gates down. Evelyn's jaw clenched. She raised her revolver, not aiming at him, but pointing it skyward. You have your answer, she said. We'll consider his offer. If we want to talk, we'll be there by sundown. Now ride. The messenger wasted no time, turning his horse in a tight circle and galloping away. Dust swirled behind him, and an unsettled hush descended on the yard. Wesley's face darkened with anger. He's bluffing, trying to push you into signing, but we can't ignore the risk. He might really have the numbers to launch an assault. Evelyn inhaled slowly, feeling the tension coil. Then we meet him, but not to surrender. We'll see if we can force his hand, maybe lure him in close and take him. Jonah nodded. Sundown's not far off. We best prepare. As evening settled, the sky flared with the deep orange glow of a dying sun. Long shadows stretched across the ranch, creating an atmosphere of hushed foreboding. Evelyn put on her duster, checking that the custom revolver remained in perfect working order. She'd cleaned and oiled it earlier, her hands steady and precise, despite the roiling tension in her gut. A small group of 7 prepared to accompany her to the windmill, including Jonah, Wesley, and Harlan. The rest would stay behind to guard the ranch. Before she mounted, Evelyn briefly stopped by Carla's room. Her friend was awake, propped on pillows. "Don't do anything foolish," Carla said, voice hoarse. "Promise me you'll come back alive." Evelyn managed a faint smile. "I'll do my best outside." She joined the others. They rode at an unhurried pace toward the southern boundary, the sky above stained purple and red. The old windmill stood at a slight rise, blades rusted, but still capable of turning in a brisk wind. Around its base lay the well that provided water for part of Cade's Hollow's southern range. Over the years, Bryce had repaired it multiple times, joking that every inch of land, even the dusty corners, deserves care. They arrived with the last glimmers of sunlight. Graham Latch was waiting, flanked by at least a dozen men. One of them was Dexter Polk, the man whose pistol Evelyn had shot from his hand in the saloon. Polk still wore a bandage over scorched knuckles, and the glare he leveled at Evelyn was full of venom. Another figure drew Evelyn's scrutiny, a tall stranger dressed in Eastern-style finery that clashed with the rugged setting. He stood a few paces behind. Latch arms crossed, a gold watch chain glinted against his vest. Something about his bearing radiated authority beyond Latch's. "So here's a glimpse of the money behind him." Evelyn thought. Latch raised a hand in mock courtesy. "Mrs. Cade, so good of you to come. I trust you're here to see reason." Evelyn dismounted, motioning for her men to remain mounted as a show of caution. "I see you brought your full retinue," she replied evenly. "Do you intend to call this a negotiation or just an intimidation spectacle?" Polk took a step forward, sneering. "You got a big mouth for someone facing superior numbers." Evelyn's pulse hammered, but her voice stayed steady. "Threats don't faze me. Latch, you want me to sign over Cade's Hollow? You know it's not happening." A flicker of irritation crossed Latch's face. The tall stranger cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Allow me to introduce myself," he said in a smooth tone. Faintly accented, Edwin Hawthorne, representing certain interests that wish to develop the valuable assets beneath your land. "I understand you've been less than cooperative." "Those assets are mine," Evelyn countered. Recognized by the Territorial Land Office and soon to be recognized federally, Hawthorne regarded her as one might regard a chess piece. "Your husband's death was unfortunate. We made attempts to negotiate with him, but time ran out. We hope to avoid further unpleasantness. Yet here we stand." Evelyn's anger flared. So they admitted in veiled terms their role in Bryce's demise. Her fingers tightened on the revolver at her hip. "You come out here with threats, bribes, and kidnapping," she said, "and dare to call it negotiating." Latch drew himself up. "We offered fair terms," he snapped. "You refused them. Now you're outnumbered, outgunned, and your precious ranch is surrounded. Surrender it, spare your people the bloodshed." Like Carla, Evelyn shot back, voice trembling with controlled rage. She was tortured. Toby was nearly killed. "How many more do you plan to destroy for your greed?" Hawthorne's face remained impassive, but Latch's men shifted uncomfortably. A few, like Polk, seemed eager for violence. Others simply stood with tense faces, perhaps not relishing an outright massacre. Wesley's voice cut in. "If you had any real claim, you'd have used the courts, but you resorted to extortion." "Says a lot about your integrity," Polk sneered, resting a hand near his firearm. Hawthorne sighed. "We attempted legal avenues. The system can be sluggish. Our backers prefer results, not red tape, and that justifies murder." Evelyn demanded. Latch's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you're innocent. Didn't you nearly shoot my hand off in that saloon? You wrecked my operation in the canyon, too, costing me men and resources." Evelyn forced a steady exhale. The conversation spiraled toward hostility. The sun's final rays vanished, plunging them into twilight. Torches flared around the windmill, held by Latch's men, casting flickering shadows on every face. You want your precious resources, she said, voice low and resonant. Come and take them, but you'll face every ounce of resistance my people can muster. Latch exchanged a glance with Hawthorne, who gave a curt nod. Then Latch turned back to her lips, twisting into a smirk. So be it. At dawn we settle this. Pray that you find enough coffins. With that he mounted his horse, signaling his men to withdraw. The thunder of hooves echoed across the plains as they rode away, torches bobbing in the gloom. Evelyn felt her shoulders sag. She'd half hoped for a chance to capture Latch here, but the presence of Hawthorne and so many armed men made it impossible. If she tried, it would have ended in a slaughter. Her small contingent gathered around. No one spoke for a long moment. The windmill's rusted blades creaked overhead. Finally, Jonah broke the silence. Dawn, we have maybe 10 hours to prepare. Evelyn closed her eyes, briefly recalling Bryce's final note. Do what I helped you perfect. She opened them again. Then let's ride, she said softly, and get ready for war. Against all odds, courage and loyalty triumph. With a final precise shot, Evelyn disarms Latch, and the remaining outlaws surrender. Neighbors rush in to help rebuild the battered ranch, proving that community can withstand any threat. In the days that follow, federal authorities confirm the oil discovery under Cades Hollow, granting legal protection. At last, Evelyn and her friends look out over the land they fought so hard for, relieved that justice prevails, and Bryce's vision remains intact. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through peril, perseverance, and daring heroics. Tell us what you think in the comments. Did you expect the twists, or would you change how it ended? Your feedback fuels more stories like this one. So share your thoughts and let's keep the conversation going.